story begins with Tennu, a 35-year-old man who finds himself in a strange place and confusedly does not understand where he is. Thoughts pull him back to the last thing he remembers. That morning he woke up with a foggy head, overslept, but still went to work. Later on the way home, his family asked him to buy some yogurt. When he was crossing the road to return, suddenly a truck hit him. Soon he realized the same truck hit others as well. There was something different about him, while others shone he did not. Tennu pondered what should he do next. Then a voice sounded, anxiously warning that if nothing was done, everything would collapse. The summoning ritual was not completed, and now this could send them all back to their native world. 10 such thoughts raced in his head. What was this original world like? Stories of brave heroes surfaced in his memory. And he wondered, were these the same heroes from the comics his sister was so fascinated with? When he tried to understand the situation, he suddenly realized he was alone. The others had disappeared. But the voice seemed to hint that they had found something important. To his horror, there was still one person left there. He wondered why no one noticed him. Listening to the voices, he felt that he was not called here, although he was next to 4 other people. The voice said that the idea of summoning was bad because it disturbed the balance of the world. And yet they decided to use summoning skills. Confused, Tennu could not understand what was happening. Suddenly he felt as if he was falling. He woke up under a tree, looked around and still did not understand where he was. His body was limp and heavy, as if there was not a single drop of strength left in it. Having struggled to get up, he looked around and realized he was in a forest. He wondered if anything could be done about this sluggishness. The forest seemed dark and gloomy, as if everything around was closing in and pressing on him. Soon he realized that this was truly the otherworld he had heard about before, and somehow he was drawn into the ritual of summoning a hero. He thought about how his sister insanely adored those comics about heroes who were summoned to another world. She always told him stories about them, and he could not even imagine that they were real. He began to wonder if he really ended up in another world, and if there is any way to return home at all. Irritated, he shouted loudly. He paused for a moment, gathered himself, and calmed down. He knew he had to think clearly and decide what to do next. Based on what his sister told him, he assumed that magic and demons could exist in this world. Suddenly it occurred to him he had just screamed so loudly. But when he looked around, there was no one around who could hear him. He kept walking and muttering to himself that everything here was creepy, and he felt completely uneasy since waking up something had stuck to his body. And it seemed as if it was slowly crawling inside him. He wanted to call for help, but all around was only an endless wall of trees as far as the eye could see. The longer he stayed there, the worse his condition became since he woke up. He had never felt so bad in his life. No matter how much he stared, the forest was surrounded by darkness, and probably some curse was making him so tired. Maybe it was an evil spirit or something like that. He didn't know for sure, but no other explanation came to his mind. The black mist around him seemed to swirl in the air, and he thought about cleansing spells and evil demons. He looked around and thought, what am I even doing here? He behaved like an idiot. He didn't even know if magic and spirits were real. But something was different. He felt it, and you wondered if his body was slowly recovering. Looking around again, he raised his hand and resolutely tried to invoke a cleansing spell. To his surprise, the black mist began to dissipate. Tennu stop. He froze at the thought of whether an evil spirit was really coming at him. Finally, it dawned on him that this was a world where magic could truly be used. He thought to himself that maybe sometimes escaping from reality is not so bad. Suddenly, a wolf appeared, growling and slowly creeping closer. At first it froze, stunned and unsure if it was a dog. Then he realized it was definitely a wolf. His heart tightened. He didn't know what to do. Fighting it would be unwise. Maybe he should just try to slowly back away. The wolf did not stop, and Tennu was sure if he ran, the wolf would chase him. Looking closely, he noticed that the wolf's paws were trembling. Almost as if it had been prey here, he knew he had to get away from here. The wolf lunged as if it wanted to attack, but did not attack. Suddenly it fell to the ground, howling in pain. Tennu wondered if it was suffering from the same black mist he had encountered earlier. Fear surged, but love for animals prevailed. He realized he had to try to save the wolf. Remembering how the cleansing magic had worked on him before, he dared to apply it to the wolf. To his surprise, the wolf growled at him, but he decided to try, raised his hand, and released the cleansing magic. It worked. The wolf healed right before his eyes, and Tennu felt a sudden surge of tenderness. The wolf, which once scared him, now seemed almost cute. Despite its size, it looked much cooler and more terrifying, and he even felt an urge to pet its fur. The wolf moved toward him, and Tennu, raised in Japan where cleanliness is above all, noticed dirt on its fur. Involuntarily, he thought the wolf needed a bit of cleaning, and he couldn't resist the thought might magic help. He whispered a cleansing spell, imagining the wolf completely clean. After a moment, the wolf stretched as if freshly refreshed. It looked at him, and Tennu saw with surprise that it was already leaving. Is it really going? He muttered to himself. But to his surprise, the wolf suddenly began running alongside him, not falling behind. Tennu marvel felt how fast it was. It seemed the wolf sensed that he was not an ordinary man. Heron 200 years ago, the forest was engulfed by darkness, an event that could not be created by ordinary means, but humanity somehow managed to do it. When the darkness spread, it swallowed the forest, and the weak were cut off, leaving only the strong behind. The wolf that Tenhu met turned out to be King Fenrir. For 2 centuries, he had guarded the forest and watched countless deaths. His magical power was strong enough to prevent the darkness from consuming him for some time. The purifying magic he was used to driving away the darkness was only a temporary salvation. Every spell he cast drained magic from him. He repeated them again and again, and this exhausted his strength at a frightening speed. He did this for years and almost used up all his magic. Fenrir realized at this rate he would soon not survive. But as his power waned, he felt people nearby, and a wave of rage and despair rose within him. He decided to exterminate them all to the last before his death. Sensing the smell of a person nearby, he rushed forward to attack, consumed by a burning desire to kill. It was then that he encountered Tennu. Fenrir froze in place, irritation boiling inside him. He couldn't believe it. He didn't think he would be so weak, yet he was standing on the brink of collapse. Fenrir noticed that Tennu was trying to gesture to him to stay away. He felt the darkness engulfing him and couldn't allow himself to lose consciousness just yet. Frustration was choking him, but then he fell. Tennu will see Fenrir fall, rush to him, and use cleansing magic. Fenrir realized, although the effect was temporary, the magic seemed to work better than you expected. There were no visible wounds, and he looked with admiration at the magical power overflowing Tennu. A wave swept through Fenrir's entire body, healing him. He had never before seen such precise and boundless magic. For the first time, it seemed to him as if he had made a person his master, and the strangest thing was that Fenrir felt no resistance at all when showing his submission. The scene changed. Tennu and Fenrir were running together, and Tennu felt a surge of strength, as if the air had become lighter. The magic revived both him and the wolf. They stopped near the cave, and its entrance is shrouded in black fog. Fen turned to him as if asking whether he wanted to enter. Tendon cautiously approached the cave and muttered that it was suspicious, and gave him a bad feeling he would rather not go in there. But as soon as Fenrir came closer, Tennu laughed and said it was a joke. Filled with determination, Tennu applied cleansing magic to the cave on. Trying to disperse the black fog, he reached out and touched the entrance, but the curse did not disappear. He wondered how large this place really was and what was hiding inside. How? Ten appeared in the cave. Before him shone several pairs of glowing eyes looking straight at him, and he wondered whether Fenrir and the other wolves lived here. Several wolves growled and roared, but Fenrir stopped them with his commanding presence. Tennu quickly realized that all the wolves were cursed, and resolutely decided to help by using his cleansing magic. But looking up, he saw the lifeless bodies of the other wolves. They did not survive. He knew somehow he had to make it work. Imagine how this time the curse fades more clearly. He focuses all his energy on the magic, and once again utters the cleansing spell. And to his relief, the curse was lifted from the wolves, cleansing them. Among them, Tennu, he noticed one dog. They were all dirty and soaked with the curse. Their eyes were full of sorrow. He wondered if they understood what he was trying to do. They were again subjected to a cleansing spell, and as soon as the magic washed over them, the wolves and the dog finally freed themselves from their curse. Tennu realized that they were all friends, bound by shared pain. With a sense of accomplishment, the 10 stood there, pondering what to do next. Looking ahead, he saw 2 paths leading deeper into the cave. He turned to Fenrir and asked if he knew what was hidden in those paths. Fenrir shook his head, and it became clear. He had no idea. Tennu realized that the wolves understood his language, and for the first time doubted whether he could really rely on them as guides. Peering deeper into the cave, he felt the darkness grow thicker with every step. The curse seemed to intensify, and he was sure there was a reason for this. He tried a few more times to use cleansing magic, but the curse seemed eternal, like a power that would never disappear. Turning his gaze back to the wolves, he saw they were still struggling. The curse still held them despite all his efforts. He urgently needed to come up with something to protect them, and his mind raced until the idea of creating a barrier sparked. He also knew that it would be difficult. He had to act quickly before the curse consumed them. Then he rushed to create a barrier around all of them. He said that it seemed to have worked, and wondered if the barrier would withstand physical attacks. He still did not know what was outside, so he thought it was worth strengthening the barrier, making it resistant to both physical and magical attacks. It was worth trying. He tried, but Fenris. They just looked at him. 10 of them explained that he had just strengthened the barrier so they should be safe. Inside, Dicky realized this cave was much bigger than he expected. Surely he could do something with his magic in this situation. He even tried on himself night vision and clairvoyance, but neither was useful, and he had no idea what image to focus on. Soon he realized it was just a matter of recognizing the outlines around. He relied on night vision and spatial awareness, which felt incredibly real. Although it was only in his imagination, he promised to cleanse every inch of this area. And he began to use his cleansing magic. He did not stop there. He further strengthened the barrier that enveloped the space. When he looked at the wolves who were all staring into the distance, he noticed. Towards the giant boulder, suddenly something on it began to shine brightly. He suddenly wondered had something hit the barrier. Protecting the protector, he asked if there was some curse on the boulder. Fenrir looked completely empty and Tenjum understood there would be no answer here and now. He slowly approached the boulder and unease grew within him. Later he looked at Fenrir's aggressive expression and thought, could that stone not be alive since its behavior so resembled their first meeting? Then he decided to cleanse that stone. He wondered should he focus more strongly on the image of the cleansing stone. He imagined it completely disappearing like in movies and commercials, but he knew. With a stubborn stone it would not work that way, so he imagined something persistent that does not come off easily, which slowly chips away piece by piece until it disappears forever. After work he cast a cleansing spell on the stone, and the stone slowly disappeared. To his surprise there lay a little bird. The bird slowly rose up, flapping its wings and purred. It touched his hand, but it was covered in blood. He believed that wound regeneration was a completely different thing than restoring damaged cells and simply closing the wound. At first, he cast a healing spell and then directed cleansing magic at the bird. Soon the little bird looked completely healthy and beautiful, although its size, unfortunately, remained disappointing. The bird pecked at Tenno's hand as if hinting, it still hurts here. He apologized and gently ran his hand over the bird. Tenno was delighted to be able to take a short break when he sat down. It seemed strange to him, but the battle seemed to shine in his thoughts. And he realized that there was still so much he did not understand. He decided to strengthen the barrier and glancing outside, he suddenly saw a black shadow, resembling a tattoo, trying to slip through the barrier. The barrier in turn launched an attack on the shadow, forcing it to retreat. Ten and everyone looked back, thinking about magic, but decided to postpone it for now. The strength of the barrier somewhat calmed him, but one thing still troubled him. It seemed they were not getting any better. Lance de Fenrir looked tired. Ten noticed that Fenrir seemed to have eaten nothing since they arrived and wondered if he was too busy with something else. Ten also sat there, confused and not knowing what to do. Then his biggest concern was to find a safe place to spend the night and to get food and water. He knew he had to focus on the most important thing, survival, and kept telling himself to stay alive and not get involved in some nonsense that could cost him his life. The cave seemed to be one of the best places where he could truly relax. If he managed to clear the entire cave, he could finally sleep peacefully. But to do this, he needed to figure out what this black shadow was. The way it reacted to the barrier suggested that its source was outside the cave. Every time he felt the presence of that shadow, he became anxious, so he realized something had to be done about it. For a moment he pondered and suddenly realized he wouldn't be able to cleanse it until he understood what it was. But before that, he needed to get a better look at the entire cave. He wondered if he could do this with the magic he had used before the sensation of space appeared. He tried to apply it. The shadows were so dense that it was barely possible to see through them, but he felt that another space was hidden in the cave. It seemed he could only see what was inside the barrier. Beyond its edge, he could see nothing. He thought that something like farsight or clairvoyance might work. He needed magic that would allow him to look at the cave in a completely different way. Something like a drone or a video camera. He remembered how beautiful it was to watch on television the aerial footage of a sunset made by a drone. That image stuck in his mind, and inspired by this idea, he decided to try clairvoyance. Suddenly, a screen appeared before him. He flinched from surprise, but it worked. Through the screen, he saw a huge stone mountain, but the entrance was strangely small. He focused on cleansing this area, imagining that he could cover the entire space. He was not sure if the curse could be reversed, but he was tormented by the thought, would it return to its source if the shadow was cleansed? With this thought, he applied cleansing magic and firmly reinforced the barrier on it. While he was doing this, wolves circled around him and watched intently. Suddenly, he felt as if something was leaving his body, and he wondered could it be magic. It seemed the black curse was retreating from the plants, and everything around became perfect without a single trace of the curse. After an hour, he suddenly noticed the shadow had returned. He looked more closely to understand where it was coming from and noticed it was emerging right from under the ground. It was. This irritated him terribly, and he knew he would have to cleanse it again. This time the curse seemed even wider and deeper, so he decided to cover the ground with a barrier, forcing the curse to return to its source. He did not stop. Again and again he applied cleansing to the land. After some time he sat down. The mind was exhausted, but the body was not. He felt trembling and did not know what to do next. He terribly wanted to return home. Fenrir approached and sat down nearby, and Tenno gently stroked his fur, wondering if this was really a wild animal. Surprisingly, this calmed him. He thought, no matter how much he pondered the situation and how much his pessimism oppressed him, he had to move on. Although Fenrir's body weight was somewhat heavy, it still gave some comfort. Later that night, the action shifted to a distant castle. Above a strange magical circle hung a stone, and the man nearby noticed something strange in his eyes. The man approached the king and anxiously reported that something strange was happening in the forest. They noticed a white light coming from the center of the forest, the vigilant man. That was the last battle of the forest king before his death. And then he ordered the man to bring even more blood as a sacrifice for the magical stone. The man agreed to carry out the order. The king announced that they were so close to taking control of the forest, the center of the world. Once those beasts in the forest had a mighty king, but that story has long been forgotten. It is time for them all to die and be honored. Lives devoted to the emperor for such a great cause. One day the king asked the man what had happened to the forest. For several decades nothing changed in the forest, and the king wondered what was going on. The kingdom of Envelis cast a cunning spell of the magical eye over the entire forest, and many sacred beasts disappeared, while demons began to emerge instead. The man said that in the last 200 years no country dared to fight the envelopes, and because of this some countries around the forest completely disappeared. Perhaps, he added, the kingdom of Envelis sacrificed hundreds of thousands of lives for the sake of its evil magicians. He said fearfully that there was nothing they could do about it. Although he did not want to believe it, the man knew that soon people would rule the world. He left muttering that the kingdom of Enveli would eventually disappear, like all the others. He hoped that the god of creation could help them. Meanwhile, Tennu woke up and stretched, extending his body. When he raised his head and saw the blue sky, he was filled with relief and joy. He looked at Fenrir and thought that as soon as Tennu finished the cleansing, Fenrir would probably leave. He had a good time. He quietly asked Fenrir if he wanted to stay close to him. Understanding Fenrir's answer, Tennu wondered if he should give him a name. He remembered their first meeting. The first thing that caught his eye was Fenrir's white, silvery fur, so he decided to name him Ko. Two more wolves of the same fur color appeared. He named the female So, and the male Geo. There was also a black wolf which he named Kuru, and the last white one Shan. Giving so many names to the wolves seemed a bit strange to him, but there was also a dog in the group. He named him Chai. He raised his eyes to the bird, enchanted by the play of colors in its feathers and its gentle song, and decided to name the bird Karen. He praised himself for an excellent sense of names. For a moment he was struck as if he was about to remember something important, but he quickly brushed it off. It didn't matter. He told himself that it was time to focus on the reality here and now. Meanwhile, Fenrir was embarrassed. He was clearly puzzled by the fact that he was given a name. One of the wolves asked him what the human head said, so replied that Tennu gave them all names. And if it weren't for him, their Fenrir race would have simply been exterminated. He had extraordinarily powerful magical and healing abilities. If they stay close to him, they will only win. Tennu restored his magical powers. So they had to obey him as their lord. He turned the chair and asked him, "What do you think?" Sheer replied that everyone treated him well, so there was no reason not to obey his orders. And they added that with the power their lord gave them, they would do everything possible to serve him. 10 of them asked Ko if he knew about any water sources. When everyone looked at him, he clarified that he was asking about a place where water could be found, and Kuru and Shin went ahead to lead him. Tennu asked them to wait for him and followed them. He noticed that although they had passed the barrier, they were still moving forward. When they approached the water, Tina looked at it and saw that it was dirty. He wondered if it could even be called water, but when he looked at Kuru and Cheyenne, he realized they were completely comfortable here. He noted even if it were cleansed, it still seemed strange. He gently stroked Kuru and Shin on the heads, appreciating them. Tana understood that he would not be able to purify the water until he recovered himself. They were moving away from the water, and he remarked that it seemed impossible to use it. Oh, how he wished they had access to spring water inside the barrier, or even better to crystal-clear Japanese water. Then he looked at his palm. He just thought about water, and it instantly appeared in his hand. Tenno Morval saw the water appear from his palm as soon as he imagined it. The magic was truly impressive. He wondered if he could create something he himself would want to taste. Then he asked if it was possible to prepare judon with a soft-boiled egg, with extra sauce and an additional portion of red ginger. But nothing appeared. He sighed and said that it wouldn't work with cooked food. He even asked for cabbage, but again nothing happened. Then he asked for chicken and maple, but nothing changed. He realized that perhaps he could not create what did not exist in this world, so he decided that instead he would have to look for food nearby. He raised his eyes to the mountain and thought, if Rocky Mountain becomes his base, he needs to take control of the territory around it. Oh, it would be wonderful if the trees around had nuts or fruits. He saw a few mushrooms but did not dare to touch them and decided to move away. He looked closely at the tree branches and noticed, no flowers, no fruits, no nuts, only the trees themselves. If he found nothing, he was gripped by horror. He was afraid he would die of hunger. Suddenly you appeared from behind, and behind you was Ko, who seemed to be angry at them. After that, Hio, Kuru, and Cheyenne ran away, and Tenna could not understand where they were heading. Tenno looked at Ko, not understanding his low girls, as if the wolf was trying to say something. Although Ko answered so calmly, Tino still could not understand what he meant and only later realized. Ko was probably worried too. He stretched out his hand, gently stroked him, and calmed him. They will all return soon. Let's continue looking for food. Goodbye. Deep down, Tenet doubted whether they would really return. He said loudly that nothing good was visible among the surrounding trees, and by that time he was already gnawed by hunger. He thought if there were neither nuts nor fruits in this world, he wouldn't know what to do. Suddenly, he noticed a new cave. Remember, the cave he had been in since that morning was hard to reach. It was nestled on a high ledge. The new cave looked like a much better home, but he understood approaching it carelessly was not allowed. He decided to rely on his sense of space and carefully examine the cave. He was surprised to find that it was quite wide and had a passage that rose steeply upward and stretched for 3 floors. And there was also plenty of space underground. At the thought of exploring it, a real surge of excitement rose inside him. Just as he imagined various options, the sound of the wolves returning reached his ears, and Tenno smiled, relieved that they had come back. To his surprise, they brought with them the corpse of a giant monster. Surprised, Tenno asked everyone to bring it to him. They all looked at him with admiration, and Tenno could not help but feel sadness. The giant monster they brought to them was clearly brought as his food. He was not as excited as they were, but he knew there was no other choice. He had to eat it. He firmly hugged 3 walls, happy and grateful. Then he wondered who would dismember this carcass. He decided that, first of all, he needed to clean every crack and every corner of the meat. Imagining a vacuum cleaner in his head, he started the cleaning and thoroughly cleaned that beast. Focusing on dirt and filth, he did not give up, pushing the curse back to its very source. After everything was cleaned, the meat finally seemed ready to eat and looked simply appetizing. Tenno guessed it might be a wild boar, but was not sure. Maybe it was some kind of monster. Then he looked at Ko and thought that Wolf Ai was a real monster. When Ko began approached the wild boar, Tenon considered him cute and funny. He thought if that well is in such a state, its komade can be bitten into. But Tenon knew if no one else disassembles it, he would have to do it himself. He looked at the walls and told them not to stare at them for so long. Let's start eating. Then he wondered how to properly disassemble this meat, and if there was a way to preserve it so it wouldn't spoil or get worse. He came up with how to cool it. Imagine the coolness of a luxurious refrigerator bought on payday, and cast cold magic on it. At first he felt satisfaction, but then realized he needed to drain the blood. But he was a little worried. It seemed completely unreasonable, and he wondered if magic would help him. Then it seemed to him that blood is like water, and he began to think about how to drain it. But he quickly dismissed this thought. He knew it would just dry up. He touched the boar's body and focused on its internal organs. When he imagined what was inside, a wave of nausea overwhelmed him. Ko wondered in surprise what that lore was doing. Chase suggested that maybe something displeased him. Heya added that probably it happened when the boar was still warm. Everyone looked at him with disappointment, and Tenna thought about blood vessels and internal organs, pondering how to get rid of them all. At first, they decided to only instantly remove the vessels and cauterize them. It seemed that this would be entirely sufficient. Ko sadly told the others that unlike them, Tenema had neither claws nor fangs, so it would be difficult for him to get food. Everyone agreed if they were also ordered simultaneously, they would cut everything out. Tenno used instant teleportation. And when something crawled out of the boar's back, the wolves stirred with excitement. But suddenly Ten set the material on fire, shocking everyone. He shook off the ash and everyone looked at him with disappointed faces. Ten App promised that with cleansing magic he would clean everything and rid the meat of the bad smell. Earlier I cut fish, but such an animal had many internal organs such as, for example, liver, kidneys, brain, and eyes. And he could not help but imagine them. He used instant movement again, so that the liver would pop out, and the wolves excitedly gathered at the smell. Tenno set the liver on fire and everyone froze in shock, he thought. It turned out as it should, so he decided to do it with his eyes closed next time. He could cool and ignite things whenever he wished, and magic even obeyed natural phenomena. Tenno told the wolves that he was going to pull out the rest of the entrails and asked for some space. Seeing their disappointed faces, he asked what was wrong. He used wind magic and it sliced the carcass of the wild boar. And then he suddenly realized he forgot to remove the fur. He took some meat for himself and told the wolves to help themselves too. Call those who brought this first, let them take their share. She asked Ko if it would be all right if he ate a little too. They all nodded and simply told him, we need to move on before Forest Bountiful returns. Bravely, to put it in human terms, they all shared the same small fate, and Chi noted that there was undoubtedly great wisdom in that. Coven asked if Chi had forgotten that he was also the king of the terrible wolves. Chai bitterly replied that he was not a king, just a worthless leader who cannot even protect his friends, and Ko encouraged him, saying that the child would definitely find him safe. He began to eat the meat, as if hinting that since they were given such long and heavy names, let them also call each other by these very names. Ten Ovens howled when he burned all the meat and said Ko that he wanted a little more. He took the extract and placed it on the stone, mumbling that it was nothing. It turned into coal, just like the meat before. He decided not to rush, warming it with infrared light, and slowly began to cook it. While the wolves were devouring the raw meat, the smell of roasting reached them and they looked at Tenno. Tenno read their gaze and smiled, placing it on the stone. He felt he had done the right thing. It was already nicely browned. He grabbed the stone, stuck it into the meat, and felt that it was very hard and slightly burnt. Then he began to eat, teasing that he would not give it away. Nearby on the stone, something strange was happening. He entered the cave together with the wolves, thinking that the first thing to do was to search it and secure it as a base. The space between the outer surface and the interior of the cave looked calm. Inside, there was no hint of life. Seeing the high ceiling, he decided to make the first floor the main hall. Thinking of combining it with the place where he was yesterday, he realized he would have to significantly redesign the space. The first level was an underground layer. It was huge and had a high ceiling. He noticed that the space seemed to stretch deep inside. Although he was curious about what was flickering on the back wall, he found no signs of life there. The floor seemed safe, so what worried him most was what was beneath it. He again relied on his sense of space and confirmed that there really was something under him. He even wondered how long the barrier he placed yesterday would hold. He felt that soon he would have to better understand this magic. Deciding to check below first, he hugged Ko and whispered that he did not want to go down. Ko licked him and he replied that now he felt better, ready to go down. As they descended, Tenno discovered a huge amount of shadow curse hanging in the air around. Suddenly they both felt something and began to glow towards it. The curse seemed to tighten around him, so Tina rushed to apply cleansing magic. To his surprise, the barrier he had set earlier reacted. He did not expect this, and now he wondered if the cleansing had failed. The curse slowly began to disappear. Tenet pondered whether they had succeeded and why there was nothing around. This curse reminded him again of what had previously hung over Karen, and it seemed to him that it was hiding something more. And then he saw a spider and was confused. It had wings. He decided to dismiss this for now and focused on fighting the black curse, using the cleansing began to work on him. The curse gradually vanished. The spider watched them. Tenon noticed that it seemed as if the spider was emerging from the ground, so he realized it needed to be properly cleansed. When he looked closer, he realized there was the main spider and another 20 smaller ones. He looked more carefully and noticed that even the world has bugs. Could these be monster variants, he thought, since people often said that spiders are useful animals. But he hesitated. It had wings. This was no longer an ordinary spider. Ko looked closer and noted that it was impressive how it had lasted so long. Suddenly, the head spider was blown away by the wind, and it plopped right onto Tino's hair. Smaller spiders crawled onto Kai and started bothering him. Tino noticed that they didn't seem to be that harmful, and he said exactly that. The second tier of the cave also turned out to be spacious, so later they would have to search all the cracks and debris. He recalled, earlier he had only shouted the cleansing spell, and although no clear image appeared in his mind, the magic still worked. He remembered how his sister said that spells require a clear image in the mind, but he thought it might be different here. He decided to try something else instead of imagining. He simply said fire. Nothing happened. He was confused, wondering why nothing happened when there was no clear image in his mind. Then he tried again, this time with water, and suddenly noticed some liquid in your purchase. He focused on the image of the flame and said those words again. And this time the magic finally worked. The fire scared the wolves. He realized that magic works when he imagines it, but he wondered what the difference was when he doesn't imagine it. Then he tried to imagine water, pronouncing fire, and fire appeared again. He wondered, is a clear image in the mind necessary when using new magic? He stepped forward and felt that the magic seemed to move with him. He wondered if once a word is tied to magic, it would take over and forever be associated with that image. Convenient, but he was not sure about it. As soon as he thought this, he noticed a crack in the cave wall and realized that something was sneaking through it. He touched the crack, hoping that inside it would be spacious, but it seemed there were no curses there and he could see nothing inside. He wondered, could Blake help like a ball of light? He created it. It was so bright that it made Ko squint and feel pressure in his eyes. Tenon apologized for this. Then he tried to reduce the light but quickly felt tired. It was difficult to precisely adjust the magic, so he asked the wolves if they were all worried. Then he tried to look into the crack and said he saw sparkling stones there. He guessed what they could be, and at that moment a spider's head peeked inside and brought a tiny piece of stone. Tenor suddenly realized it was silverstone, a beautiful material. He called the spider chief and sincerely thanked him for the gift. Then he understood, turning to the spider leader was exactly what was needed. For some reason the wolves were intently staring at the stone, and Tenet wondered if it was rare. It was truly beautiful, but right now it was of no use to him. He carefully put it in his jacket. Moving forward, Tenno said that there might also be shiny things on other floors, but it didn't matter now. Shine whispered to Kuru about how calmly Tenno reacted to the mithril, and Kuru wondered if Tenno was even human. Ten thought that there were no cracks or crevices left here to explore, and now the conquest of the Rocky Mountain was finally complete. He hadn't looked inside the bag yet, but found a few small items inside and didn't expect any of them to be useful. As soon as he looked back, his smartphone was already blown away by the wind. Securing the base, Tenno was going to scout the surroundings for people. but also wanted to fortify the territory so that at least he could sleep comfortably. Sitting with the company, he excused himself, saying that he needed to put something on the floor because sitting like this hurts the butt. He wondered, would there be something soft and smooth somewhere that he could use? Suddenly the floor changed and you wondered, was it leveled? They looked at him in surprise, and he began to guess what they were thinking about. Despite this change, it became cozier here, and he was able to smooth the surface of the stone. The entire surface was now well maintained. The wolves said how amazing it was. Ko said it was hard to believe, and those solid rocks were now filled with magical power. It was quite expected from their lord. Then he added that since he arrived there first, he would lead. But suddenly, everyone began to slip on the surface. Tina was stunned by this and thought that the fine-tuning of magic was the real challenge. Ko barely kept his footing and thought to himself that if he had fallen there, he would have almost made a fool of himself. Lightning illuminated the night sky, their fierce discharges striking the barrier created by Tennu. But only the spider chief noticed this. It reminded him of the past times when he bore hellish flames and lived deep underground. There he dragged any prey unlucky enough to wander into the lava, and for this his relatives feared him. The days of his existence seemed to fade before death, for he was Ternia, the keeper of death. Once the spider was huge, but now he had shrunk to a tiny size. He restrained himself from thinking about how small he had become. It seemed that in protecting the children he had spent all his magic. Somehow they survived, perhaps by luck, or perhaps thanks to his sacrifice. But how could such a powerful miasma disappear? Ko called him by his true name. When the spider answered, he asked himself aloud, is it true how Ko perceives him, or is it just a fiction? Could his body really have become so fragile that even a gust of wind could lift him into the air? He waved off Ko's, saying it was none of his business. Instead, he asked how it could have happened. The power smelled of magic again, as it once did. Then he inquired about the dark magical power. But he faltered when the mention of Tennu came up. Ko said he understood what the spider wanted to convey, but they too were saved by the power of Tennu. She waved it off, insisting that it was impossible and that it was humans who polluted the forest. Cod disagreed, explaining that Tennu's magic had a completely different quality. That was why they revered him as their master. The spider wondered if Fenrir's was proud. They both replied that they bore no grudge against the spider's family. However, he warned that if the spider turned against their lord, it would be a disaster. The spider snorted mockingly, saying he would never do such a horror, and no matter how much they looked. It seemed that 10 of them had magic hundreds of times greater than each of them, even at full strength. The spider noticed that he felt Tennu's magic gently absorbing and quickly restoring the forest. Ko reassured him, as long as there was no hostility, everything would be fine. He did not want there to be fewer kings in their forest. The spider asked why Ko assumed he would lose. After counting, he put aside the jokes and asked him to tell the children to stop teasing Chai. And the spider realized that his children actually hadn't been teasing him. Ko explained that since they had moved away from him and surrounded Chai, he had become quite frightened. Then the spider asked who Chai was. Ko replied that the master gave Chai this name and even suggested the spider call him simply Ko. The spider acknowledged that this was indeed his name, and then remembered Tennu, the one who called him a leader yesterday. Then he asked about yesterday's lightning, because it released a terrible burst of magical power. No one answered, probably people were launching some attack again, but Tennu's barrier stopped it. The leader heard this with surprise and said that was impossible, as if Ko really hinted that Tennu holds a barrier across the entire sky, which, in his opinion, sooner or later will exhaust their magic. They agreed, sadly admitting that even in his former state, he would not be able to hold such a barrier even for a moment. But their master seemed completely unmoved. Meanwhile, Tennu sat alone, lost in thought. For the last few days he had not seen a single person. Preparing his house, he launched a clairvoyance drone to survey the surroundings, but wherever it flew there was only endless forest. Although he had traveled quite a distance, there were only various animals around, no houses or roads in sight. Wherever he looked there was only wild wasteland around. He began to wonder if he had ended up in a world without people. The connection was lost, but he comforted himself. There was still hope. There were places he had not yet checked. Meanwhile, the renovation in his house was going smoothly, visibly transforming the atmosphere of the home. Since then, after numerous trials and errors, he managed to make the floors and walls smoother to the touch. Carving stairs into the rock, he laid passages to the upper and lower floors, and with each strike he became increasingly skilled, and his movements instantaneous. From the outside, it still looked like an ordinary mountain, but inside stretched a network of stairs leading all the way to the top floor, where a spacious mansion with a 2-story basement was hidden. Examining the insides of the stone, he dreamed that someone nearby would appreciate his work, but there were only wolves around. Instantly moving, he pondered a recent trend. Some animals began competing to see who would eat the organs of their prey first. This makes one think. Some communities, like the Inuit and other groups, ate raw food to extract as many vitamins as possible. Perhaps bringing fresh meat was not such a bad idea. But eating only meat became boring every time, just as he expected. He craved fish, and now he would even agree to the cursed kind. The monotony of meetings became unbearable. Just then he noticed that a colleague was acting strangely and worried asked himself what was going on. Soon he realized the cursed creatures had returned. And this time they went on the attack. Even they themselves were being beaten. He frowned, not understanding what was happening. After yesterday's terrible lightning, everything only irritated more and more. He told them not to worry and took a deep breath. Climbing to the top of the cave, he launched his clairvoyant drone, and it instantly began scanning the area. He noticed that the entire forest was barely covered by a lingering curse. But he also remembered yesterday beyond the barrier he saw a large lake. If he manages to cleanse everything up to that boundary, he will be able to simultaneously expand and strengthen the barrier. Ko watched with curiosity, trying to understand what he was going to do. Tennu wondered if he could reach the lake from where he stood. He decided to check this first by releasing magic outward, something he was used to when extracting all those stones. He imagined stretching a single long thin thread of magic to the lake. It turned out to be farther than he expected, but he confidently felt he could handle it. Releasing incredible power, Ko felt every pulse of his magic. It was unbearably intense and could turn into danger. 10-0 Ven commanded. Imagine how this stretched magic unfolds everywhere and envelops everything up to the lake. And at the same time close it so deeply, as if to the very bottom of the earth. He applied this method and managed to extend the barrier, clearing the land all the way to the very lake. The barrier grew almost tenfold, and strangely he felt his body becoming lighter. Standing at the head of the shore, he noticed, it really feels boundless. They were not equal to me. Kote gave a short nod of agreement. Tennu felt that the curse, mixed with water, mostly came from outside, so he assumed it might be possible to filter it using the barrier membrane as a filter, and decided to carefully assemble a 3-layer filtration system. Yet it still seemed as if something or someone was imposing this curse. Until the other side stopped their raids, he decided. From then on, every day he would send back the accumulated curse with all his might. He placed his hand on Ko and said decisively, "Let's finish this by tomorrow." The scene shifted to a strongly protected kingdom. Outside stood a man who, observing, noted that once again a quiet, peaceful day had come. Mislost, commander of the 4th Chavarichny Order of the Kingdom of Inwelis, approached and called out to the Hamers. Hamyers, commander of the 1st Order of Shivarek, coldly acknowledged Mislost's early return. Mislo replied that this time nothing serious had appeared. Gammer asked if anything had changed in the forest since then, and Mislo denied it, though he was sure that sooner or later a monster would come out of there. But the kingdom was protected by the mighty barrier of the king, and even if something happened, they were safe. Gammer noted that everything should be fine, though he hesitated. Mislo said that this did not resemble Gamers. He was worried about the strange light coming from the forest. The Gamers nodded and explained that a few days ago bright light spread in all directions from the very center of the forest. With the help of a magic stone, their king gained the power to subdue the kings of the forest. But in all their years, they had never seen such a radical change. The king of the forest was not just a man. A myth and a miracle that he still retained such power. Mislo confirmed this, saying that this was why the 4th reconnaissance expedition was expanded. But he was assured that everything would be fine. He proudly reminded the Hammers that for over 400 years Invelis had repelled foreigners, thanks to the power of the king and the mages. It was only necessary to believe the king and go into battle. He looked outside once more and muttered that the words "Wam is lost" turned out to be true. They would have to stay on guard, because magical beasts beyond the barrier were growing stronger. The night had barely begun, and there were few truly important matters. Now Mrs. Lost was heading home to finally enjoy a hot bath. Gamma. The father apologized for keeping him waiting, then turned his thoughts to the magic stone. And that complex magical ice bell, created to control what was considered the center of the world, the forest, was all held by one magical stone. It was said to have been found in ancient ruins, and it emitted strange magic, and rumors went that the blood of many mages who tried to study the stone was spilled in vain. At the court, those who controlled the power of the stone were the first to use it to stop aging, and for hundreds of years, they managed to remain in power. Gamers knew well that this story was not entirely true. Although they seemed to age slowly and it looked natural, he never doubted it, and the truth was unchanging. The entire stability of the kingdom rested on one stone, and he could not get rid of the thought, what kind of mysterious magical stone was this? Going outside, Gammer noticed a group of elves walking straight towards him. As they passed by him, he admiringly examined the intricate patterns on their backs, and mentally noted that while he hadn't noticed, they had already arrived there. The man, trying to urge them on, shouted for them to move faster. Gamers noticed this and said that seeing such a large crowd of slaves wandering around was really strange, and the man recognized Gamers as the commander of the 1st Quarter Chevrolet, and asked if he had any business with the slave house. Gamers denied it, saying he was just passing by. The man, sighing with some relief, replied that even if Gamers wanted to buy slaves, he wouldn't be able to deliver them. Supplies were almost gone. The players froze in surprise. and the man hastily added that only the day before about 50 beasts were taken as offerings for the magical stone. As their ranks thinned, they stopped and carefully assessed their actions to correct the situation. Gammer is still working on it, not ready yet, but says he must already set off. When the man left, a figure in knight armor with a sword approached, accompanied by another person, and that figure remarked, "How rarely do you see the commander of the First Order of Shevowitz in such a place?" Gammer instantly recognized him, Gamble, commander of the 5th Night Quarter. He thought to himself that Gammer is a true battle maniac, even among the 5th-ranked troops, reinforced with magical stones. Gammer never knew how to get along with those like him and tried to steer the conversation into a less awkward direction, after which he noted, "His new sword is truly impressive." Gamble said that the king recently gave him a sword. It resembled a royal blade, a magical weapon that became stronger and sharper the more blood it drank. Gamma eagerly wanted to test his new sword on several slaves, and thought to follow the king's example to drink their blood. However, Gammer asked for restraint. When Gamble was leaving, he ordered the man overseeing the slaves to find those who seemed more attractive, and he replied that the slaves were selected specifically for breeding. To this, Gamble snorted disdainfully and said he didn't care. Then he ordered the man to behead 2 slaves. He gladly noticed that the sword was incredibly sharp. The man fell to the ground from shock. Gamma muttered that this is getting annoying. The slave symbol makes them unresponsive. The priest next to Hamel persistently asked to wait. The sword must absorb energy, and for this, a special technique is needed. Gamma impatiently ordered him to proceed with it. Meanwhile, Gamers was pondering how the kingdom seemed to be sliding into madness. The scene meanwhile shifted to Tennu. He was preparing a fishing trap. Although he had to use vines instead of threads, he proudly said that he managed to craft it. Swinging the trap in front of Ko, he explained that this is a way to catch fish. Just as Kuru was about to eat a small piece of meat, Tina noticed that it was tasteless. He headed to the lake, hoping that there would be fish there. Reaching the lake, he saw with despair that it was cursed. Disappointed, he muttered to himself, although he held on to hope and came all the way here to find it. He conducted a check and confirmed his suspicions. Nothing good. The curse woven into the very water did not want to yield to cleansing. Tenno, full of determination, created a barrier. He said that for some time he would leave the lake and the river alone to focus on purifying the water. But what could he do to cleanse it? He passed the river current through a barrier membrane, filtered it, but that was not enough. He needed a way to separate the curse on a wider scale. He was completely confused, could not think of anything. He wondered how the curse seemed to have spread everywhere, as if it had passed through a washing machine centrifuge. Absent-mindedly stroking her fur, he noticed that her hair had straightened. A thought flashed in his mind. If static electricity attracts dust, then maybe it could also attract the curse. Interested, he decided to try. Concentrating, he reached out to the lake and imagined applying a thin layer of static electricity on its surface to absorb the curse. To his surprise, it worked. However, the surface of the lake was now covered with countless tiny black spots, remnants of the curse, making the lake even more disgusting. The scene was again in the castle. Priests gathered around a magical stone, and one of them asked if there were any questions regarding the court marriage. The court mage waved it off. Just yesterday, it seemed unimportant. The stone had not experienced any external influence, and this worried everyone. The man noted that he had noticed nothing unusual. The court mage stared at the stone, caught himself wondering, was it just his imagination? After a moment, he focused on a certain area of the stone. Meanwhile, at Lake Tenagad, he gathered all the cursed energy and raised it to the sky. He proudly exclaimed that he had finally gathered everything. The walls looked at him in shock. Tenno continued, saying that, as he promised yesterday, he would try to send the cursed energy back along with the amount he had gathered inside the barrier. In an instant, he made it disappear, and the lake remained completely clean. Ten smiled, full of satisfaction, and said that now he only had to wait a little to see if the animals would return. Ko too was shining with joy. Tenot turned to the wolves and said it was time to go home. He needed to work on the interior design. In the castle, the wizard called Tenno to inspect the scratch on the magic stone. As soon as he did, the stone flared with bright light. Not understanding what was happening, the mage noticed a thin crack in the stone. The scene shifted to the main hall. The king sat in a chair and ministers lined up around him. A man had just reported on the day, and the bald man next to the king croaked to call the next one. He noticed that nothing important was said and openly sighed from boredom. The only report he cared about was to hear that the forest and the world were now in his hands. He asked anxiously how the sacrifices for the barrier made of magic stones went that day, and whether the forest was about to collapse. He spoke with grim determination that he would squeeze the life out of the forest, dry it to dust, and make it the cornerstone of his world. Soon he completely wiped that last dirty country of beast people off the face of the earth. Just then the knight itself flew in, carrying an urgent message. The man next to the king loudly and surprisedly asked where this noise was coming from. The knight fell to his knees before the king, trembling, and said in a nervous voice that a crack had appeared in the magic stone. The bald man asked if the knight had really come, insisting that there was no room there. They have the same barrier as the one that protects the country. The knight confirmed, saying that the matter was not only that the barriers seemed strange. The room flashed with light for a moment, and then indisputably a crack appeared in the stone. The king's anger flared up, and he sharply ordered the knight to be executed. The calm gamers, as always, sent a signal to hold back the knight. Everyone in the room was silent, but each had the same thought in their head. Everyone knew whoever dared to criticize the king's anger would suffer a fate similar to slavery. The king, still boiling with anger, shouted to Miss Lost, "Immediately go to the forest and find the source of this alarm." The scene shifts to the forest. A giant cardboard box is about to fall on them, and they are rushing, escaping. After some time it stopped, and he suddenly realized that he was working on the house at that very moment. Then he remembered how he entered the hut and prepared the meat. Cooking had become much easier since he opened his store. Although he simply grilled the meat, it was still a noticeable improvement. On the first floor there was a kitchen and a simple and spacious dining room, so much space that everyone could gather together and eat. He said that cooking while looking at the greenery around was incredibly peaceful. Ho, unable to resist the aroma, approached and asked Tennu if he could taste some grilled meat. Tennu understood and handed him a small piece, saying that it was a real delicacy. When he tasted it, the flavor brought him genuine delight. Others, seeing his reaction, also asked for a piece. Tennu agreed and was about to give them some when he noticed Chai standing in the distance. He shouted to him and asked why he was standing aside and silent. Chi, some in the group were also supposed to be offered some meat. Chi, stunned, could not understand if he was really allowed to take some. Karo calmed him down, saying that their master wisely decided to share, and added that if Chi wanted more he should join the next hunt, to which Chi, even more impressed, asked if this invitation was really for him. He smiled and agreed to join them. Everyone enjoyed the juicy grilled meat, and Tennu noted that maybe next time he should use 2 grills to cook faster and more efficiently. After he took a bath, he was enveloped by a quiet calm. Completely relaxed, he happily pondered how he managed to heat the water with magic. He said that magic is truly the best. Until recently he always relied on magic for cleaning, but as a true Japanese he couldn't do without a proper bath. Although there was no soup this time, he still managed to get himself in order, and within him still flickered the desire for many things. He put a lot of effort into making everything work, and really wanted to share this experience with everyone. Although lately it seemed that everyone had become chubbier, he worried whether they would still fit. Then he did something resembling a toilet. He couldn't hold back his emotions, he missed it so much. He remembered how he had previously sneaked into the forest to avoid wolves, and how Ko once caught up with him, saying it was dangerous to go alone. When they walked side by side, Tennu gently reassured him, "Don't worry, everything will be fine." He stopped drowning in memories and realized that such a thing would not happen again. Sitting in the bath, he smiled and said that since he learned that magic might require stones, he had become attentive to the smallest details. It turned out exactly like the real thing. Even the toilet with a bidet lid and automatic cleaning made him admire the wonders of magic. Someone heard a noise and came to check on Tennu, but was stunned in the process. He went outside with burning cheeks, while others just watched and wondered what had happened. Ho was embarrassed, hesitated before mentioning the diet, and admitted that he accidentally peeked at his master in a vulnerable state and fears that Tennu now hates him. Tennu, "I am already used to it," suggested installing doors, boasting that he was very satisfied with the toilet he created himself. In fact, he made one on each floor. While practicing magic, he accidentally created the unexpected silver ore, which magic barely managed to handle. He was surprised to see it stretched out and wondered how far it could extend, while the chief observing said skeptically that it was hard to believe. Tennu channels magic through mithril. Tennu continued stretching it, and soon noticed that light passed through it. It turned out to resemble glass more. He sat down and thought that everything looked good even after making it quite thin. So out of curiosity, he decided to try inserting the material into several rocky windows. Eventually, he opened the windows wide on every floor. It occurred to him that maybe he would also want a wooden floor. He had plenty of materials. Then he went into the forest to look for a giant tree, noticing that it was the straightest in the area and seemed so pleasant and tall. A scene from the television came to his mind. They said logging was necessary for processing, but in reality it takes years. He decided to use magic, first to cut off the branches and then to remove the bark. Tennu saw that the tree was of excellent quality. It was time to turn it into boards. He used wind magic and finished the job lightning fast, but forgot to cut the base, and now the boards were about to fall on them. The scene returned to the present, and he mentally noted that next time he would definitely cut the stump after felling the tree. Now he had to carry the boards to the front edge of the base. Using instant teleportation, he teleported to the 4th floor to the bedroom. After informing the others, he decided to start laying the floor. At first, she thought that laying the floor was just placing a few boards, and the task would be easy. But as soon as he started working, he immediately noticed the gaps and thickness of the boards varied and did not match. In addition, the boards were too heavy and large. Even his instant movements, which allowed precise adjustment, did not help. His perfect floating board technique eventually turned into a complete mess, and after thinking, he realized that relying on a solid floor could backfire later. Sitting down, he sighed heavily. There was still so much work ahead. He decided to change his approach and really wanted a proper sharp tool to slowly wear down the boards. The stone in his hand was too rough for this, so he decided to make a tool from silver ore. He pulled the metal, making it thinner, and then shaped it, and it turned out to be what seemed like a real blade. After sharpening it, he checked the blade and it really cut well. Ko, who watched the whole process, could not hide his admiration, and Tino added that although the stone mountain was not soft, he would have to handle the blade extremely carefully. The rocky mountains turned out to be surprisingly flexible when magic passed through them, and this intrigued him greatly. He wanted to check if he could cook something in a pot. He wanted not only meat, other food, other flavors, something more. Continuing to think, his mind caught on the door hinges, and he began making a doll. He said that the windows could be opened, so he decided to also put a few hinges on the door to the 4th floor. The doll he created turned out quite cute. He made a few more and said that he hadn't played with glue for a long time. It was so much fun. The stones he used seemed to shine, and he wondered if he could make only their eyes shine. After finishing his creations, he didn't even notice how he fell asleep. The next morning upon waking, he decided to allow himself to sleep a little longer. Rising, he noticed that everything in the forest was properly arranged. The base was ready. To his surprise, the doll they made suddenly began to move on its own. Shoulder to shoulder, they laid out the wood and built the floor. Tennu and the wolves washed themselves, and the wolves turned to look at him. He was confused. There were 9 dolls, and all of them were carved from the stone walls he crafted last night. He could not understand how they came to life suddenly. He remembered a children's fairy tale about elves who secretly sewed shoes at night. Tennu even wished that the floor would be finished while he slept, and wondered if that was why it was completed. He found that one of the dolls was still here, and asked himself if it did not move because he had not formed a clear image in his mind when creating it. Then asked everyone to stop working and line up in front of him. Suddenly they froze and, to his surprise, lined up on his command. Then he addressed the last one, called it a helper robot, and simply ordered it to move. And then the last doll stirred. Tennu felt boundless happiness seeing this. Tennu threw that he entrusts them all with this task, and he again watched as they got to work and marveled how quickly and neatly they worked. It was already 5 and they finished so instantly, maintaining order and cleanliness, and they were so cute. The wolves, shocked by what they saw, began calling the dolls golems. They were clearly excited. And one of the wolves asked Ko if this was the same weapon with which people attacked the forest, and Ko begged everyone to calm down. Tennu understood that at first the wolves were scared by the stone dolls, but he believed that over time they would get used to them and start to get along. Tennu asked the dolls to lay the floor on the 2nd and 3rd floors in the same style and gave them some free time, so he decided to go explore the forest again. He went together with the wolves, who promised to bring a bunch of meat, however. But South had a different plan. He decided to find some vegetables and spices. They walked forward, and Tennu noticed that the morning mist seemed to cling tighter the further, the thicker. He continued to clear the space, step by step. He walked. Although the source of the curse seemed to be where the light was flowing, he continuously sent it back and wondered what would happen to the one on the other side. After all, everyone reaps what they sow. He noticed that compared to when he first arrived, the forest had become much brighter, and then asked Ko if it was like that at the beginning. 10 inconspicuous fruits hung on the tree. He saw something like this for the first time. He wondered if it was edible. He stopped, hesitating whether he could even climb the tree. Despite the fruit lay right under his nose, but he couldn't reach it. And at that very moment, the boss jumped up, leapt onto the tree, and began climbing up. Tennu Smile was glad that he managed to do it. Then he noticed that 8 more wolves were also climbing the tree. Looking closer, he realized that they had no wings. He wondered if they were hang fighters. But he thought he had met them only a week ago, and they had already grown so much. He hoped it was just his imagination. Ko and the rest were also growing quickly. He was now about 185 centimeters tall. Then he noticed that spiders were carrying something, and he wondered in surprise how they managed to get it. He held the fruit in his hand and hesitated whether it could be eaten, because the fruit was appetizingly bright red. The fallen fruits lay not apparently, the animals had already feasted. He cut the fruit with a sharp object that he had. He grabbed it with his hand and took a bite, and it turned out to be incredibly tasty. He even teared up, saying that after such a long time, savoring something sweet was a completely different feeling. The fruit was crunchy, tasting like a peach, ripe and very tasty. He gave some to the spiders and their company, and then they gathered all the fruits. He admitted that he accidentally took more than he planned, and now had no idea what to do with them. Even forcing the men, the bag still only held one. How he wished the bag worked like that robot's pocket. He stuffed the fruits into the bag one by one, amazed at how much fit inside. The magic was truly incredible. On the way back, he gathered a little more food. All the wolves went hunting for a wild boar and eventually brought it back. Tennu announced that they had returned, asked Hayo if anyone was hurt, saying he brought a large haul, and Hayo only said to look at Soha she caught the most. Tenno told them that first they needed to clean everything up nicely, and then he laid out all the fruits and vegetables and said he brought too much without salt. But with these, their nutrition will definitely improve. Then he began preparing for prayer and said that first he would make a cut to drain the blood, and then remove the skin with the wind. He did just that, took a knife and cut the meat, preparing it for eating. The walls seemed to be burning and eager to bite. The entrails slightly peeked out and awkwardly apologized to them, but still asked to be eaten entirely. While Ko and others were eating, he set aside some meat for himself and as a reserve. Shane noticed that the meat prepared by the Tenum was so clean and light to eat the best. Karu remarked that there was a lot of liver that day. Tino replied that the front of the house might become cramped, and if he had salt, he would make ham and other delicacies, and also sighed that he wished he knew how to tan leather. He used the cold storage on the first underground floor. For the vegetable storage, tables were needed to cool the harvest, but now it was not working out, so he decided to think about a solution later. When the meat was frying, Karen could not take her eyes off it. Tenno approached, praised that the meat turned out excellent, thanked Karen, and added that he preferred to eat cooked meat. He also described a vegetable with a barely noticeable sweetness, something between cabbage and lettuce. Although raw, it had a tender core. He recalled a sour fruit with a refreshing scent, although it was bright green and what it was like. He squeezed it over the fried meat. He did that. He bit into the dish and said it was pleasantly hot, with a gentle sweetness that spread through their mouths, and the acidity added another layer of flavor. He even said it was tasty, although it was just ordinary meat, and he could have used a bit of sauce. It reminded him, except for Karen, everyone was already gathered around, and he couldn't understand what had happened to the chief. In 3 days, the floor on the upper floors was finished, and he was glad that the dolls managed all the hard work even in the kitchen. It was important, so he decided to make it even better. He asked them to build a frame measuring 200x 160x 60, and wondered if they could handle it. Then he approached the chief, thinking that now with food and shelter arranged, only one task remained. He noticed that the chief was getting bigger and, as expected, said it was a bit scary. The chief spoke in his language, asked Tenno to look at his body, and explained that thanks to a generous portion of Manitano poured into him, he had recovered so well. He said his children could not contain their gratitude. Tenno also needed a large amount of mana for the barrier and golems, and the chief continued supplying them and the forest with mana. Sometimes Tenno worried about him. When Tenno approached, he wondered if the chief was trying to convey something, and thought that he was really smart and at least friendly. Tennono then said he had something to ask the chief. The clothes he always wore began to wear out, although he cast cleansing spells on them every day. He thought that being spiders, they should be skilled in crafts, although he had never seen Chief break anything like that. Tenno really wanted new clothes. Then he remembered about trade, and asked the chief if he knew any plants they could gather that would last longer since. The boss did not answer. Ten-A wondered if he understood it all. So he decided to set off on the road together with Chief, Chi, and Kuro. He explained that he took only Chi and Kuro with him because Ko was not nearby. And then he told both of them that he was counting on them. They both grumbled, and Kuro said in their language that they were unexpectedly entrusted with this task. And Chi agreed, saying it seemed Tenno didn't really need them. He believed that this was a good opportunity to show Ko, who had always been concerned about Chase's strengths, assured Tenno that he would make every effort to live up to his master's expectations. Shouting to the chieftain, asking if it was there, and in a moment they saw giant caterpillars. The wolves froze in shock. The boss was standing there. Tenet wondered if something had happened to him. He stepped away from Huseni and said that maybe she could fulfill his wish. Karu and Chi only raised their eyebrows skeptically. These are suasive magical beasts with deadly poison, and the chief assured them that as long as they did not provoke the caterpillars, everything would be fine and he would handle it. At that very moment, the caterpillar suddenly stretched out its paw to grab Tino's hand, and this shocked the chief and the others. Chief was curiously wondering what the caterpillar was doing. Tino flinched a little, said he was really scared, but for a moment it seemed to him that the caterpillar attracted him. He turned out to be quite different from what I had imagined, but looked strong and quite suitable. I passed this on to the boss, and he admitted that for a moment he was ready to burn alive because of Tino's barrier. Kuru and Chi said embarrassedly that now there was no help, and then Tino asked the chief how many of those larvae they could take with them. They put one on Kuru and one on Chai, and when they returned, the chief reassured them the caterpillar will not spit poison. He asked to explain this simply and clearly so that everyone could rely on him, and Tino apologized to the wolves for this. When they met Ko, he was surprised to see that Kai was collecting beetles again. Tino responded by hugging Ko warmly, greeting him, and Chi, just about to say something, was interrupted. He immediately said it was just a joke. As always, Chi had such a cute reaction. Tino entered the house thinking that while working with the toilet and refrigerator he had figured something out. Certain magic can be embedded in the very stones, which gives a lasting effect, and he also had a new plan brewing. The strategy is not to dirty the floor, to rely on automatic cleaning. He decided to turn the second floor, which he did not use, into growing rooms and also install a ventilation window. He put a few necessary leaves into the food and placed caterpillars on them, saying that now he only needed to find someone to take care of them because he couldn't manage on his own. While making stone dolls, he told them that they would take care of the caterpillars. The caterpillars got scared. Tennu was surprised because the dolls were so cute. Yet the caterpillars were afraid of them, and because of that, it seemed that the work with the threads was going well. And Tennu began to think about how to make the fabric better. He took off his t-shirt and offered it to the dolls for inspection. They started discussing something and Tennu wondered, had they found a solution? It seemed they were not going to make the bed immediately. One of the dolls led him to the bed and showed it to him, and he was delighted, saying that it was even better than he had imagined. He said it was incredible he managed to do it in just half a day. And now he was already so close to civilized life. He eagerly awaited the night. At night, everyone cuddled up and slept next to the bed. Tennu lay on it and thought that now he was beginning to understand the value of a bed. The work of the stone dolls was captivating. The next day he stood in amazement, barely believing that yesterday there was just a rock wall here. Now everything had completely transformed, even stylish furniture appeared, which he had seen before on the internet. They served him food, everything was ready, chopsticks, water and all. When he started eating, he couldn't help but admire how well thought out everything was. The food and water were twice as good as usual. He noticed that there were only 8 dolls, the other 2 were in the caterpillar room. He put on a new light green t-shirt and black pants, and the smooth fabric felt exactly like silk. He half-jokingly asked not to share with anyone that the color of their clothes changed, depending on what they ate. Finally, he sighed with relief. He also had plenty of underwear in the form of spears. It was a bit awkward when he examined them. He stared at the sewing machine, the very one he had seen long ago on television, and thought with admiration, did they really make all this themselves? It was extraordinarily impressive. He thought to himself that it was time to change the pace. He decided to head into the forest together with Ko, Shine, and Hale, feeling that today's search would definitely be successful. He was already starting to wildly crave a little spice. Pen had only 1 stone left, and he fearfully hoped that nearby there would be more rock salt or something similar. He even wondered if there were oceans in this world at all. Step by step they moved forward and came across another cave. 10. He noticed that although he had not been in this area before, the better thing was that the Great Rolling was relatively close to their home. He noticed a slight decline inside and became worried, as if a curse or something similar was at work here. He left a small flame and ordered the wolves to stand guard. "Let's go inside," he said. They moved deeper into the cave and found a wild path leading even lower. As they moved, sounds began to come from inside. Moving forward, they emerged onto a large open area, and there they found themselves face to face with a colony of mass assault. Tennu was shocked but immediately rushed forward, burning with the desire to fight. Hannah realized it was not the time to stand idly by and just watch. He asked for a ride. He activated the cleansing power, but it did not work. Then he tried to raise a barrier, but the ants still climbed on him. House quickly intervened, blocking the ants' path and throwing them away. Tennu stood up, but the ants were relentlessly approaching. The black patterns on the ants' bodies gave off something ominous, and he was filled with unease. They were still inside the barrier, surrounded by ants, and those creatures seemed to be barely breaking through it. Although the barrier held, Tennu stood confused, not knowing what to do next. The cleansing technique did not work, and he stood bewildered, not knowing what to do next. He pondered the black patterns on the ants' bodies, and he recalled his first encounter with the wolves. Then he noticed the same black mist that enveloped them. Maybe the curse completely consumed their bodies. If so, perhaps exorcism will help. The ants continued attacking from above, but the barrier still protected him. Tendon muttered that nothing good would come of this, while struggling to form a clear picture in his mind. He wondered if 2 completely different beings could live in one body, as if someone were possessed. He imagined a state in which the true eye of the ants were bound and could not break free. Then he understood what was happening, and resolutely declared that he himself would break the curse that bound their souls. Resolutely, he used his power to tear the bonds and release all ends to freedom. This scene reminded him of a dark page of the past when the forest was engulfed by black magic. The rivers disappeared, and the fruits became poisonous. The king of the forest, who once ruled and protected it, vanished as soon as the curse was lifted, and no one ever managed to reach the human world. Ten from Su, stunned by the sudden appearance of new monsters, saw the forest swallowed by darkness again. The vision of the ants darkened as dark magic wrapped around his body. He wondered if over time he would become just another creature harming the forest. But no, he could not allow that. As one of the kings of the forest, he would never let such a fate befall him. He summoned the water dragon of the forest, the one who once ruled over all worlds, and asked for his help. The scene returned again to the present. Tennu placed his hand on the ant's head and soothingly whispered that now everything would be all right. The surface under his fingers felt smooth and cold. But suddenly the ant stirred and Tina asked herself in surprise, "What is happening?" Ko shouted to his aunt, asking if this was really Aunt Faromi, because his presence was so different that Ko did not even recognize him. But Anne still recognized him as King Fenrir. The ants freed them, and 10 of them thanked them before following behind. He remembered Cohen's words that everything was fine, and noticed that they had been following the ants for 30 minutes already. He hesitated whether it was really fine, and felt that the ant leader resembled their chief and did not look bad at all. Finally, they reached the place, and Tenno released his light magic to scan the surroundings, and discovered a dark curse lingering there. Ko asked, could this really be the home of the water dragons that? The ants answered affirmatively and told that Burva was once a beautiful sacred lake, filled with rich magic, and Tina realized that, as he feared, it was already too late for the lake. Overcome by a sudden surge of determination, Tanam used his abilities to absorb and cleanse curses. I think there may be other creatures around Rocky Mountain that have already been possessed, and we suffer like an ant. He felt the curse spreading throughout the forest and swore to send the broken curse back twice as strong. Then he untied the bonds throughout the forest. The movement that shocked the company. When Tenno finished the cleansing, they reached the lake. The view was breathtaking. Muraka felt how the cleansing power began to act. It heals and restores her strength. Ten stretched out, felt tension in his body, and became thoughtful. The search for the seasoning unexpectedly turned into this. He then suggested, let's continue the hunt. Muraka followed him, and the tenor froze in amazement at her actions. When they moved on, he noticed a fruit nearby, within reach, and thought strange but familiar. Out of curiosity, you picked it up, wondering if it could be eaten. He smelled it but did not detect any scent. As soon as he bit, he was immediately struck by an extraordinary saltiness. This was exactly the taste he had dreamed of. He turned to Ko and said, let's take as much as we can and quickly go home. Meanwhile, Miss Lost along with a group of knights were prowling in the forest. But they felt bad. They moved slowly, some even fainted from the tension. Half a month ago, Miss Lost was sitting in the castle with gamers and asking for a break. Yesterday, he had just returned from the forest, and already today he had to conduct another inspection. Does the king really want him to die from overwork? Hammer told him to leave it and promised to pretend as if he heard nothing. Miss Lost later told how those people made a lot of noise when the Varda magic stone cracked, but after a thorough examination it turned out that nothing serious had happened. Usually, magical stones from monsters were barely the size of a fingertip, and next to them the castle stone looked simply gigantic. That little scratch was not worth worrying about it. All the gamers agreed, saying that was how it was, and even the records confirmed. The magical stone was already covered with cracks when it was first found, and Miss Luz Degree called the concern about it nonsense. However, he noticed that this time everything was different from other inspections, and if the problem really existed, they would have to do everything possible to solve it. From the very beginning, the 4th Chavurixki Order was a unit with vast experience in the forest. It was created to catch and subdue monsters, and now serving the forest itself had become one of its duties. Miss Lau thought to himself that he had been in this forest many times, but honestly, nothing ever happened there. It was just a useful, dark, gloomy place. He quietly said that if the inspection turned out normal, it would mean there were no problems. The gamers asked anxiously if that was really so, and if nothing was happening in the very center of the forest. Miss Law sighed and replied that gamers could not seriously assume that there were kings of the forest there. The players stood, not knowing what to say, and were afraid to even move. Miss Loss asked what he was afraid of, reassuring that because of the evil eye monsters had overrun everything, so reaching the energy of the forest was almost impossible. But even if something did emerge, it would not mean that the most powerful kingdom in the world would ever lose. That is exactly what happened. When Miss Lost was preparing to set off, the village slaves who were sent on reconnaissance and household chores passed a bottle around. Miss Lost agreed, said he would entrust it to the boy, and they would set off as soon as the knights were ready. Only the chosen set out to go. The road to the forest usually took a full 10 days. The boy also agreed to set off. Miss Lost could not understand why Gamer looked so worried. Then the man asked if something had happened with the First Order's command. Mislos replied that this was not the case at all. He had long been friends with gamers, but because of his cleverness, he thought that he tended to overthink everything. Among the gamers of the Shavaric Order, there was only one who almost never used slaves. Miss Loss noted, it seemed as if the gamers used slaves as people. From the moment of birth, endless slaves were immediately branded with the powerful mark of slavery. They were doomed not to feel emotions, and not to think independently. They could not utter a single word without an order. Nanga suffered much more, but still it would be easier not to think about them. Through his loss, he saw nothing in them but slaves. The man agreed and added that he felt the same way himself. He thought that the 5th commander was treated a bit harshly. Miss Lost added that no matter how much they tried to justify it, sacrificing so many people to the magic stone was simply unacceptable. But he restrained himself and suggested just to forget about it. The man said that part of his loss was not unpleasant to him, and Miss Lost wondered if that man was mocking him. The scene shifted to hammers. He was sitting, writing a letter, and replaying in his mind the words Miss Lost had said earlier. The gamers did not believe that Miss Lost could find anything without going into the very heart of the forest. Although they assured that the Fourth Nightly Order was familiar with the forest, in reality they had covered less than 10% of it. The forest covered half the world, and no one had yet managed to reach its center. Several hundred years had passed since that magic was cast, and rumors about the revenge of the forest kings still circulated. But beyond that impassable obstacle of the forest, people said there was no force capable of affecting the magic stone. Since the stone was found, it should have grown stronger from all the countless sacrifices offered to it. The gamers then, holding their breath, wondered, had a creature appeared there that surpassed even the kings of the forest? Half a month later the action shifted. Miss Lost and his squad fiercely fought with the monster. They plunged their swords into it and finally killed it. The knights rejoiced in their victory, but Mislos told them to leave it. The man nearby also noticed that something was wrong here. Miss Lu grimly noted that half a month had passed since their entry into the forest, and there were strangely few monsters. The man nodded and added that so far they had encountered only a few creatures, although usually they would have come across at least 10 by now. Miss Lust also noticed. All the creatures they met were enhanced magical beasts of the kingdom, altered to attack only the natural inhabitants of the forest. He was biting his elbows for not taking a Jishna with him. They themselves could not properly assess the situation. He was seized by a strange premonition. Listening carefully, he heard rustling among the trees and felt a dark, sinister presence nearby. He could not understand what was happening in the forest, but someone reassured him. We are still on the usual path, this must be the same forest as always. But Miss Lost could not shake the feeling that the air here was unnaturally clean, and it brought her a strange, previously unfamiliar discomfort. And the feeling of fear slowly seeped through his body. Others also seemed to feel something strange. Miss Lost wondered if they were reaching the boundary, then suggested taking a brick of salt. He shouted to the reconnaissance squad whether. He ordered them to move forward, check if there were any dangerous creatures here, and return in an hour. When they set out, Misla felt that the road was still long. If there was no danger, they would camp here for a short time, and he ordered 5 from the slave squad to take turns standing guard for 6 hours each, while the rest prepared the camp. The others hesitated and did not set up camp there, and Lady Lost asked if anyone wanted to say anything. They replied no. While they were carrying out their tasks, Miss Luz thought to himself, if he fails to sober up the squad, they might do something reckless. The slaves did not even know fear, and Lady Lost wondered if this was normal after all. They were deprived of emotions from birth. Then the man told him that there seemed to be no threats here. The slaves had sharp senses, a good nose and hearing, so for now everything was fine with them. Miss Lost was about to respond when suddenly a blinding light flashed in the sky. Everyone froze in shock, and Miss Lost thought it was like a streak of light flashed by. But there was no attack and no one fell. They allowed the code of the screen mechanism and the ground began to glow, so the guards simply froze in shock. Lost pulled himself together again, preparing for an ambush. After everything they had been through, they all ended up lying unconscious. They could not understand what had happened. Miss Lowe guessed whether the Forest King had attacked them. It seemed that everyone who fell had simply fainted, and no one appeared to be injured. A man approached him and reported the slaves were no longer there. Shocked by the loss, he wondered had they all been destroyed. The man objected, saying it seemed they had escaped on their own. Mrs. Lost jumped up at the news and wondered if the crest had been damaged. He knew he would have to report this to the king. Tino walked beside the creature and said, "Since you will join us, you need a name." Seeing his bright red body, he decided to name him Shuri, and Shuri was touched when he received his name. When they returned home, Kuru said their master was late. They did not like sitting at home with dolls. Ko asked what happened. Karu explained that he was returning from hunting and, as always, was carrying the prey to the master's room. But when the dolls saw him, they attacked with the most malicious expression he had ever seen. It was the most terrible thing that happened at that moment. Sharid appeared, and Kuru froze in shock, not believing in the Hell Garden. The chief came and sharply asked why Shuri with their master. Cherry replied that this was exactly what they should be asking, why they were here. It was clear that a deep rivalry burned between them. Tenno, sensing the tension in the air, asked them not to fight. They were already on bad terms. Shuri reluctantly agreed to cooperate, and the chief coldly said that they would never understand each other. But if Tenno proved that Shuri was really worth something, none of them would have to lose their home. Ko thought it was impressive how Tenno, with his strength, managed to bring together two peoples who could never live side by side. It reminded him of the situation with the Phoenix, about how everything was with them back then. He entered the room and was surprised to notice that even the ceiling was already ready. The dolls called him, and he suddenly realized that they had already used all the planed boards. And suddenly he remembered tomorrow he had to do something very important. Gathering the fruits, he thought that so much had happened, but now it was time to make the salt he had always wanted to create. He was not sure if it would work, so this time he took about 5 fruits and left the rest in the storage. Earlier, he had tried to cast some vague time delay spell on the vegetables in the storage, and looking now at the fruits, he thought it turned out quite well. At first, they gently covered the silver or the bowl with a thin cloth, and with all their might, they squeezed the juice. He warned them once again, simmer carefully so it doesn't burn. There was still a little liquid left, so he strained it once more. After 2 hours of exhausting work, he finally managed to make some salt. He rushed away, exclaiming that such a wonder deserved its own special box. He filled several containers and noticed that in the end he had turned all the fruits into salt. The imagination that those hard golden ores could be turned into wonderful vessels instantly filled me with admiration. Not only silver, the ability to freely control gold, which was once saturated with magic, would have been impossible even for him before. He gave all his strength for half a day, and at night it was time to enjoy delicious meat. While he was cooking, he sprinkled some salt and aromatic herbs on the thawed steaks and let them rest for a minute. They watched him together, and Ten apologized, saying that salt was something he would not share with them. He continued to fry the meat over the fire, dreaming of a frying pan or a cast iron pot and some oil. Lard can be rendered from pork fat, and although he had only seen it on television, now he had to improvise. After grilling, he wrapped the steaks in thick leaves and let them rest a bit. For the finishing touch, he fried the outside once more. When everything was ready, he was about to take a bite when suddenly 2 wolves sneaked up to the meat. Having enjoyed the taste, he pushed the food aside and told the wolves that their portions were already prepared outside, and reminded them that it was salted so they could not eat it. Still, he slid some towards them and assured that he was not trying to feed everyone something strange. When he looked around, he gave some to Karen as well. He suddenly realized that Karen was no longer nearby and saw her fly up into the sky. He kept waiting all the time for her to return the next day, but she never came back. Although she was a strange little bird, it seemed that everything would be fine with her. He could not help but worry. She was so small and defenseless, and there was always the threat of an attack by some dangerous beast. Ko spoke in his native language and told Ten in case he was worried about Karen, but it was unnecessary. For the one who was dearest to him, Karen should have already accumulated a huge amount of magic. Could it be that Karen was actually restoring more strength than Ko? Ten and a hug Ko cried and wondered if Ko was also worried about him. Then he pleaded with them not to leave him, holding Ko tightly, and thought that since he already felt a little better, he needed to find something to distract himself. Once he tried his hand at tanning leather, but it turned out to be very difficult. At first he thought it would be a great way to get rid of meat and fat, but when he tried to do it with magic, everything turned against him. He did not know how to finely tune the process at all, so in the end he made a big hole with a knife. After he painstakingly scraped off the flesh, every time he tried to wash off the dirty residue, the water became black as tar and the belt hardened and began to stink. Finally, after all this, they encountered their greatest obstacle: painting. This was always where everything went wrong. No matter what he did, the leather tanned and could not be softened. And no wonder he knew little about tanning, so he could not understand what caused it. Then he gave Ko some food and told him that this was the last rinse. He imagined, there is fur, you can make a bed or lay a carpet, and also leather, there are boots and even accessories. It seemed his goals were getting bigger. One of the wolves thoughtfully asked what Tennu had been occupied with lately. Another replied that it seemed it was not about food at all. When the wolves returned with the prey, Tennu greeted them and asked them to wait a moment. Compared to before, now everyone ate much more and there was plenty to do. The chief also brought his prey as proof that he had been hunting too. Tennu understood. Since Shuri arrived, the chief seemed to have become more competitive, and he wondered how large the animals here could grow. Even the size of the shore was comparable to a small car. Then Tenel noted that since they had already made salt, it was also worth trying to prepare ham. After a minute, he suddenly realized he had accidentally left the fur soaking from yesterday. When he checked, the water was already murky brown. He took out the fur and wondered if it would still be okay if he just dried it in the air. After some time, he noticed with surprise, the fur had become softer than usual. Thinking about this, he asked himself if it was because he had left it in that special pot he rarely used. He decisively gathered wood of the same kind and decided to boil out the necessary substance from it by boiling. But while he was doing this, he was not entirely sure if it would work. He gave the dolls the name Shiki. Smiling and commenting that the name was cute, Shuri fussed around, knowing that the master himself created all the dolls. Tina reminded him that he still called the smaller ones One Eye and Three Eye, after which he asked One Eye to lift 3 previously frozen pieces of fur, explaining that he himself would take on the process of caring for them. The dolls worked lightning fast and Tina was impressed. He said that they even tried different concentrations, carefully stretching the fur so that it would shrink as little as possible during drying. He thought to himself, although he created them, they seemed much more skillful than him. 10 of them asked if they wanted to try more tasks, but it seemed that there was no space left in front of the house. He always assigned firewood gathering to the one-eyed, but suddenly he wondered should he take on clearing a larger space himself. Looking at the huge fallen trunk, he noticed that it seemed to be over several hundred years old. and the thought that all these logs were cut from one such massive tree caused him a slight feeling of guilt. He showed him the tree and asked in his own language whether it was worth cutting it down. Ten was surprised and wondered if this was normal at all. They were still cutting down trees. He will have to process the wood scraps and then carry them to the third floor and the first basement. He noticed how the dolls were carrying away the split logs and suddenly understood they were still crafting something. He cut down many trees and felt that he had already done more than necessary for today. Returning to the house, he decided that enough was enough for today. At that very moment, the doll showed him a cozy armchair. He was surprised to see that this hanging chair was the very one he had wanted back in high school. The details were so precise that it was a little frightening. He noticed the bathtub was also made of wood, and the stairs had railings and wooden steps, also with small anti-slip pads. And the door to the toilet never appeared. He could not get rid of the thought that when Karen returns, the changes will definitely shock her. The shot moved to Karen. She was sitting by the lake that Tennu had already cleaned up. The next day, Tina realized that he needed to decide what to do with the field of stumps, but to his surprise, all the stones had disappeared. He noticed how the ants hurriedly carried the last pieces of useless logs to their anthill. He went to the lair, nodding approvingly and observing their work, thinking to himself that this was exactly what he expected from them. Shari came out of the lair, greeted him, and added that this lair was now much cozier than the lair of Idakasan. Tino understood that Shuri was inviting him to come in, but politely declined, sincerely apologizing that he could not enter. Looking around, he saw how the ants were digging tunnels in the ground, removing stumps and plowing the field with amazing efficiency. Inspired, Ten decided that he could set up a real field here so he wouldn't have to constantly look for vegetables. The plot was small just enough to feed him, and he thought he could manage it. Then out of curiosity, he wondered if potatoes would grow well in that soil. He asked Churi if she knew any vegetables that could grow well there. It grew from under the ground and could be eaten. When Shuri left, Tenno told Shiki that if they were going to cultivate the field, they would have to make their own organic fertilizer. He explained that his father once took him to the fields, so he knew how to do it. He asked Shiki to help prepare the farm and explained that he would allocate a corner of the field under the shade of a tree, dig a hole there, and build a wooden frame. He was going to take turns, sometimes burying food scraps, sometimes dead leaves, sometimes dry grass. After that, he sprinkled some water to speed up fermentation. As soon as he splashed that water, there was only waiting left. Thinking about it, he opened the compost container. As soon as this happened, a swarm of beetles instantly burst out and he was stunned. He pondered how to deal with it. Then he began to accelerate the process, hoping to turn the place into a magical pantry for vegetables. To facilitate this, he ensured that water vapor rose from the soil and the air filled with aroma. Digging the soil again and mixing it, he even made the mixture better. Meanwhile, wolves were chasing a wild boar and finally bit it together, killing it. He smiled and said that he hadn't enjoyed such a successful hunt for a long time. Suddenly, Tenno noticed a figure flying in the sky and curiously wondered what it could be. He reassuringly told Shiki that the current setting was quite suitable for now. The temperature was warm, so everything could be left as is for some more time. Suddenly, a giant bird appeared before him. He wondered if it was Karen. When Karen approached him, Tenno told her to wait. Suddenly, Karen began to cry, and Tenno, stunned, immediately explained that it was not at all what she thought. But he was also happy. He realized that Karen was not only safe but had become even more beautiful. Paul, who came to inquire, instantly recognized it was Karen. Karen, in her language, asked for help with the monster, saying that his strength was not enough to cope with it. Tenno saw a creature resembling a fluffy ball with wings and felt that it was under a curse. He directed cleansing magic at the monster. When the curse was lifted, someone asked if the water had already dried up. Karen answered confidently, "This power will now definitely be reborn." Ko loudly reminded them that among the kings there was a race of divine beasts that ruled over the 5 elements that created the forest dragons. For many years they protected the forest from human invasion, and then suddenly disappeared without a trace. If the water dragon were still alive, the water in the forest would remain clean. Karen agreed. She believed in it too. The return of the dragon's power will undoubtedly revive the forest. Karen then decisively told Ko that he was going to find other dragons and bring them back to Tenno's side. Ko suggested, since Karen is so active, it would be best for Karen herself to take on the search while Ko promised to take responsibility for the 10 of safety. Karen replied that he did not believe their master needed Ko protection. Tenno gazed enchanted at the water dragon, unable to get enough of its beautiful blue slipper. It looked like a fluffy fur ball. As befits this world, he wondered, is this world really alive? Then he asked why it was so, and Karen had no idea, but speaking its language, confirmed that inside undoubtedly hides a water dragon. He ran 10 strokes over the creature, noticing how soft and fluffy it was, and decided to name it Fluffy. Ko jumped up in surprise. Their master named the water dragon, and Karen agreed, saying it was a good name. Tenno felt that Fluffy was pleased with its name, and at that very moment he Suddenly sounds were heard and it became clear Shan and the others had returned. He saw Cheyenne carrying a much larger prey about the same size as Cheyenne himself. What was incredible, Shane proudly declared that they had caught a big prey. Tennu noticed how Cheyenne's tail was wildly wagging, and said that he seemed much happier than usual at this moment. He was especially happy. Tennu wondered how recently he had encountered various creatures. First the fast offspring of a spider, then a bird, and now this mysterious being. He thought that the wolves were probably happy too after all. This was another world. Lately, it seemed to him that his skills were constantly growing, and he sincerely appreciated the work of the wolves. Karen returned and they decided to hold a feast. Tenno began cutting the meat, and noticed that he was already getting used to carving the heart, not that he wanted to eat it. While cutting, he came across a stone near the heart of the prey, and was tormented. Was it a sign of disease or just a lump? Looking further, he found several more such stones, but not all the prey had them, and this made him think. Were they always there, or was something else at work here? He tried to clean the stones, but nothing changed. Having convinced himself that the dolls were not cursed, he decided to ignore them and turned his attention to the items they had made. 10 of them said in unison to Ko that day he wanted to try to craft something. First they prepared to silver or to take up the tray. Then they gathered all the stones, rolled them, laid them out on the platform, and everything was ready. The stones from the mountain easily took shape and had a strange property. They retained the effect of the last magic cast on them and were not afraid of heat. This gave Tenny an idea. He could use them for barbecue, so imagining the coals heating up, he heated the stones which he put into a vessel made by a doll. Balls, then he took long sticks and skewered vegetables and meat for cooking. Then he said he would have to skewer the ingredients using gold or a skewer. He was used to frying on a kitchen stove, but now he realized the shape of the grill also matters. Looking at Karen's face, he asked her to wait and assured her that the food would be ready soon. Lately, even the chief had started eating cooked meat, while Cole and the rest still ate it raw. It was then that they approached together, drawn by the smell of meat. Tina wondered, had he already finished what was inside, so she decided to give him some. He also wondered if Fluffy could eat meat. When he saw Fluffy eat it without hesitation, he thought about adding some salt and lemon juice to his portion. Taking a bite, he instantly felt an explosion of flavor. It was simply incredibly tasty, probably worth making more kitchenware. And a tasty sauce for the meat also seemed like a great idea. He began to invent ways to create them, and the more he thought, the clearer he realized. Those stones did not seem strange at all. Maybe he could fill them with magic. He tried, and to his surprise, magic instantly flowed through the stones. Until now, the most practical materials for conducting magic were stones from Stone Mountain. But as soon as their magic supply was exhausted, they stopped working, and he was also troubled that the toilet poorly flushed waste. Staring at the stone, he wondered, could it be used for that too? But he needed to test it in practice. It seemed that the more magical power he put into the stone, the more it could accumulate energy. Tenon suddenly noticed that the color of the stone had changed. Now bright green like a precious stone. If the same happened with other stones, it turned out that each transformed into its own different color. It seemed the color change depended on the type of monster, and the moment when this color stopped changing also varied depending on how much magic was poured in. The stones were beautiful, but Tennant did not yet know how to use them. He even thought about selling them for a lot of money, but if he later regretted it, there was no one nearby who would buy them. He noticed that Ko was intently looking at the stones, and Tina thought in surprise what was wrong. Take a deep breath and release fire, shocking tenor. He wondered if it was magic. Tenno thought that Ko knew how to use magic, but he did not expect such a sudden demonstration. Ko picked up a red stone, surrounded himself with fire, and released an explosion. Tino was stunned and confused. When Ko pulled for another stone, Tina suddenly understood what was happening. He still did not fully understand what exactly Ko was trying to show him, but it seemed that Ko would continue to demonstrate until Tina understood. Tenno began to suspect that these stones could amplify magical attacks. He decided to test it on a glass of water. He focused on it and noticed that the amount of water changed. Some were bursting out while others disappeared, being drawn into the surrounding water. It was then that Shuri came, and Tina greeted him joyfully. Looking at the situation, he almost noticed that he had received a very convenient thing, and its true purpose would only be revealed to him later. Shuri extended food and smiled. Tenno, take it and you enjoy it too. Ten too, will they eat it all? The ants looked at him, and Shura explained that those things can even be eaten raw. Tenno tried them along with the meat and found that it was very tasty. Of course, he then extended Tenno a little and encouraged him to try. Tenno agreed, but suggested to leave it under the sun, for now first he was going to cultivate the field. Shari asked where he was going, and just then the chief appeared, saying that such things were not to their master's liking. Tenno headed to the field, impatiently asking the dolls when they would finish telling their story. The ants helped, and it became much easier for them to dig. He had to mix compost, which he had prepared earlier, into the soil and continue treating the land with it. He had never made compost himself before, so he was not sure if it would work, but he decided to try. Taking the axe, he began furiously digging the ground, thinking that if the soil was good, he would soon reach the ridge. He continued working, and after some time said that this space should be enough. Usually, to plant potatoes, the tubers were cut in half. Then he noticed something and asked in surprise what it was. Felt some kind of curse and doubted whether it was safe to eat at all. While Shuri happily said it was an excellent find and advised Tenno to soak it in water, saying that more soil might gather that way. He finished plowing the field and felt a strange sensation. He had planned only a small garden, but it was turning into a whole farm. He had already planted 100 potato tubers, but more than half of the field was still empty. He wondered if he had made a mistake somewhere. Shura looked upset. She did not understand why Tenno buried the potatoes after they had worked so hard to harvest them. Ko noted that if their master wanted to preserve them, he could have used the underground storage. And Karen added that she did not know why, but felt there must be a reason why Tenno avoided this option. Tenno said he did not mind planting them now, but noticed that the season had become warmer than when he arrived. Moreover, on such a large field, weeds would become a real problem. How would he cope with everything? He wrote. He realized that he needed more stone dolls to help. He warmly greeted his dolls and sincerely thanked them for their hard work. Now that the field was tended by workers, he decided to check the lake. The water was clearer than before and looked almost flawless. He thought about making soy sauce, but had no idea how to grow soybeans. But if there were fish in the pond, he could try making fish sauce. A TV show he once watched came to mind. It said that fish sauce is made by mixing fish with salt and letting it ferment. He had a habit of picking up such random bits of knowledge. Fluffy approached him and he sincerely appreciated his effort. He quietly admitted that maybe that laughter was trying to tell him something, but at the time he did not understand it. Hidden took the fishing rod and started fishing, explaining that he tried to make something like a hook, so it should work. He also said that they would catch fish to eat. They waited a bit, and suddenly something unexpected appeared on the ground. It stunned everyone. 10 of them thought that maybe they caught something and started guessing, does it have a mouth? He thanked Fluffy, convinced that it was all thanks to him, and they decided that this would be enough to prepare fish sauce. As soon as they gathered enough, they could stock up on fish sauce and fry the rest. He hadn't eaten fish for a long time. The scene moved to the castle, where Miss Lost told the king everything, and the mage standing nearby asked in surprise if it was really true. Gamers did not take their eyes off Miss Lost's return and wondered how it could be. After all, less than a month had passed. He thought that maybe something had happened. At that moment, a man approached the gamers and informed them that all commanders were ordered to gather in the audience hall. When everyone gathered, a bald man, seemingly lost, asked him if he could find the cause of the crack in the magic stone. Nizlost, a warrior loyal to this country, was always ready to carry out orders without fear. However, with every moment, he felt as if he was being judged without grounds and about to be punished without any reason. He later explained that when they approached the entrance to the forest, they suddenly ran into a wall of light. When he came to, it turned out that all the slaves had already escaped. Moreover, their enhanced beasts had their fangs torn out, and finding himself in the middle of this completely incomprehensible situation, he tried to force a sound out of himself. The man asked in surprise, hadn't they died, to which Miss Lost replied that it seemed completely absurd. The king, noticeably irritated, stood up and was about to leave, and the man asked where he was going, feeling that this situation was true madness. Then the king ordered that the fourth nightly order remain on alert, waiting for the next command. As the others withdrew, Jemble called Miss Lost a coward. Miss Lost and the man who went with him on the mission stood there, both anxious, when Heimers approached. He sighed with relief and said he was glad they had returned safe and sound, and asked Heimers what he thought was happening in the forest. On the outside, it seemed like nothing strange, but Miss Lowe felt the same fear as he did, explaining that it seemed as if the forest was repelling them. Honestly, Miss Lowe was sure they had perished as soon as they passed through the wall of light. However, although all the slaves escaped, the soldiers behaved quite normally, and he remained confused. He could not understand what had really happened. Hammer suggested that it could have been a warning, and guessed that if there was a creature bigger than the Forest King somewhere, it could have been involved. Mizlost asked if Jamers hinted that the King of Power was behind all this. The Jamers replied that it could be so, but the Forest King was so powerful that they would have noticed it much earlier. In such a situation, a creature bigger than the forest itself could have settled in the forest. Meanwhile, the king walked down the corridor with a heavy heart and could not believe that all the slaves had remained. And the very idea seemed absurd, even if such a thing were possible. It would mean that the slave brands, enhanced by the magical stone, had ceased to work. He said that it was impossible. Sacrifices had been brought to the magical stone for over 100 years to strengthen it. The king looked outside, thoughts swarming in his head. He believed that the country's protective barriers were still functioning properly. But maybe something was wrong with the enhanced beasts they released into the forest. He wondered if their consciousness had returned because of that magical stone. Thanks to the magic stone, they could absorb the power of the forest and to become rulers of the world. He always obediently fulfilled the will of the gods, and mastering the magic of the forest did not allow the forest beasts to resist. 10 years passed and there was not a single act of resistance. A few more steps and it would all be over. He laughed in front of two women, but his laughter instantly turned into anger. Drawing his sword, he could not understand why it had to happen right now. Enough, he muttered, his voice full of rage. The forest will be burned. Panel was already preparing to take the fish sauce and explain how it is made. The first step was to cut off the head, remove the entrails, and drain the blood so that the fish could be cleanly cut. The silver or nitho passed effortlessly through the fish. The next day he was salting the fish, constantly emphasizing that everything depends on the amount of salt, and he had to estimate how much to put based on how much fish they had. And for this size of fish, 20 salt should be enough. He continued working, saying that first you need to rub the salt generously into the fish. Then they put the salted fish into a jar and sealed it tightly so there was no gap. He did not stop until the jar was filled to the top, added a little more salt just in case. Then they put the jar in a container and covered it, explaining that it should be stored in a cold, dark place for about a year or two. Tennu felt that because of the magic of this world, the result might be different, so instead he decided to keep it for 3 months. After that, the consistency became thicker and he smelled fermentation. He decided to speed up the process with magic, bringing it to about a year of aging. Ko wondered what the master was doing now. Shuri did not know, but she felt a pleasant, tasty smell in the air. Tennu, using magic, successfully prepared the sauce, but after smelling it, he felt a disgusting stench. Although the smell was unpleasant, it was peculiar, and the fish meat had already decomposed, so he thought that should be enough. Now it remained only to strain the mixture through a fine cloth. He did what he planned, and was pleased to see that the sauce had acquired a beautiful light brown shade. A precious drop of perfection. Tasting it, he felt that the saltiness was just right delicious. It's time to add fire to stop the fermentation, the time to cook has come. Together we watched MSC cooked there. I cooked this on the barbecue. He even froze the rest of the fish, so that day they decided to enjoy grilled fish. Since they were returning soon, they also planned to fry a portion for Karen. When the fish was finally fully cooked, they flipped it to the other side and carefully dripped a few drops of fish sauce. The aroma of the food filled the air, enveloping everything around. Then Surf himself took and bit a piece. He reacted completely differently than expected. Chief and Ko Laptvari were not at all sure about his reaction. But his face suddenly lit up. The fish was incredibly tasty with the sauce and he really wanted some rice with it. His efforts finally paid off, and so did he. He savored the moment and noticed that the wolves began sneaking up on the fish. He sharply snatched it from their hands and ordered them to wait. The food was oversalted. It would harm them, so they definitely should not eat it. But when they stared at him, their gaze scared him. In response, he said, "All right, 1 drop for each of them." After that moment, he realized he would still have to increase Karen's share. Just then he heard a sound, turned around and saw that it was Shuri. He told her to stop scaring him. Jokingly said that it would have been better to take only grilled meat, and finally could eat peacefully. But at the very moment when he was about to savor the dish, he noticed that the chef was approaching to take a bite. He was eating fish and enthusiastically said that it was incredibly tasty. But there was no time to let thoughts run free. The chef was also watching how others ate. That evening he lay on the wolf and grumbled that the day had tired him. Now nothing was better than a fluffy bed. He gently touched the wolf's fur, fascinated by how monsters slowly change. It was truly captivating. The fur was incredibly soft. He decided tomorrow he would definitely check the fields, and thought to himself that the little ones could already safely be called a farming herd. He went out to the field and greeted the dolls, smilingly noting that his clothes seemed to have undergone a serious update. When the dolls worked in the field shoulder to shoulder with the ants, he decided to help them. He asked if they needed anything, but they were silent. He was shocked. He did not even suspect that they no longer needed him. "So make sure you come with something in your hands." They asked Tennu to pour his magic into it. The chief showed his thing. It was bigger. Tennu told them, "He will gladly help." He could not understand what to do. When they touched the objects with magic, Tennu could not help but think, are they really trying to pour her out? He asked if that would be enough, but it seemed they wanted him to pour out his magic as well. When the things began to crack, Tennu apologized. He realized that he probably overdid it. Suddenly, small insects resembling Shuri and Chief crawled out of the cracks. 10 of them screamed loudly in surprise. Then the same 10, along with Ko and others, stepped back, apologizing for such a loud scream. He felt sorry for Shuri and the chief, but he understood. He never got along with insects. If those creatures were centipedes, he would have been simply blown away by fear. Chief sat on Kai's back and Tina was worried. Was it okay that Chi was riding him? Tennu told Ko that after such a long time it felt so good to walk beside him again. Looking at Ko, he asked Shay if he could ride on him too. Stillitz rejected this idea and turned away. Then he thought that they both had been getting along lately, but maybe they did not like the attention he was giving Ko. Che firmly disagreed and insisted that this was not the case at all. Ko teased Che, "Don't tell me he's jealous." Che replied that this was not the case at all, but then looked around. Both Ko and Tennu found his reaction cute. Before another cave, a remark was made. There really are many caves in the forest. Approaching the cave entrance, 10 of them noticed something inside. Creatures resembling wolves growled in their direction. The scene shifted to the castle. Numerous mages and knights stood before the king. A man announced in a firm voice that they would be accompanied by 25 mages of the 2nd Chavorichny Order, and the 5th Chavorichny Order was tasked with taming the monsters. The gamers realized that this was the result of their discussions. Then the king spoke. Until now I have spared the forest beasts, and everything I did was for the glory of the country. But despite his repeated mercy, the beasts still resisted and his patience were exhausted. That is why he decided to set the forest on fire. The knights understood why they were called there. Finally, it was time to show what they were capable of. But the gamers wondered, is this even possible? The mages radiated formidable power, and the monsters would not have had any chance against the battle-hardened knights of the 5th Order of Chavarek. Almost certainly, in this situation they were not dealing with the true kings of the forest. The scene returned to Tennu. The monsters were approaching to attack him. But the barrier created by Tennu forced them to retreat. She shouted to the wolves to stop fooling around and get a grip. He then looked at Tennu. Tennu, using his binding magic, locked the beasts in a cage. It was noted with admiration that it was good they ended up trapped. Just at that moment, having thought it over, he added and told Shane not to worry. And then he let them go. But as soon as he freed them, all the beasts suddenly collapsed, spitting blood from their mouths. Tina shuddered from shock and immediately rushed to treat them. While doing this, he realized that these beasts were persecuted friends, and they looked terribly exhausted. Something rose within him, and he muttered that he would never forgive whoever did this to them. Meanwhile, in the castle, the king addressed his subjects. Let's show the forest kings how terrible the kingdom of Enwelis can be. His words ignited their rage, and with one gesture the king released a lightning arrow into the sky. After a few days, Tennu tripled the number of members in the farmer squad, and soon a small lake appeared near the field. Tennu addressed the ants. Would they help cultivate the land in exchange for it? Fluffy, who was passing by, suddenly stopped by the water and began creating a stream of water to pour onto the ground. Tennu sincerely explained that he did not understand at all what Fluffy said, and he wondered if Fluffy was hinting that they needed to cut down trees to expand the lake. After that, Tennu got back to work, returned home and sighed. The day had been especially hard. Then spiders appeared, persistently nudging him to follow them. When they led him to the pantry, he noticed it and wondered if something was wrong. When Tennu entered, he froze. The previously empty shelves were now packed to the brim. He realized that the pantry lacked space to store the harvest and to have food for the winter. Ten decided to expand the room. To do this, he froze time in the cold room and discovered that the dolls were unlocking the locks. He also noticed that the dolls arranged everything neatly and harmoniously, like real professionals, putting things in their places. Just as Ten was about to help, he restrained himself, hesitating whether it was really necessary. That is why he went hunting with Ko. Ko, in his native language, told Tennu that sometimes it is worth listening to the heart. Nodding his head, Tennu shouted, asking him to wait. Together they set out hunting. After some time, they reached the edge of the barrier. And Tennu noted that, not counting the detour, it took them 2 hours to get here. He wondered if it was even possible to expand the barrier anymore. Soon they came across a dragon. Both of them growled at it. And when the dragon was preparing to attack, Ko rushed in, trying to cover Tennu. Karen was flying above. Glad that he had returned earlier within the magical barrier of Tennu, he always felt great. But as soon as he noticed the wyvern, he felt how rarely they were seen. Karen noticed Tennant on the ground and immediately understood. Wyverns have a strong, hard outer shell, so ordinary attacks were unlikely to work, and he decided to intervene and act. To his surprise, Tenov in the air suddenly struck the wyvern and cut off one of its wings. This stunned Karen and the wolves, and Tenno himself too. He felt that his reflexes worked after the previous fight. He did not expect to cut off the wing, but it happened automatically, as if he had trained for it all his life. After the wyvern was defeated, Tenno asked Ko if he could eat it. Ko's reaction hinted that it would be very tasty. At that moment, Tenno noticed Karen and smiling greeted him, asking why he looked so surprised. On the way home, Ko even gave Chi his portion of wyvern meat, and Chi sincerely thanked him. Tenno did not even have time to properly examine the work. The dolls did not allow him, and he was afraid that Chi would leave as soon as he found friends, but it turned out that his fears were unfounded. Tenno has. In despair and disappointment, he wondered if anything had changed since then and where the curse could have come from. At the same time, lightning struck the castle near the king, and he was stunned, wondering if he was under attack. However, this seemed impossible because the country was protected by a powerful barrier. Gamers sat next to Miss Lost as they discussed the attack. Miss Lost was shocked to hear that the king had been attacked, especially since he himself was not there and did not see it. He could not understand how it happened if the king was under barrier protection. The gamers explained that lightning struck right before the king's eyes. Miss Louse was impressed by the strength of the barrier, but curiosity gnawed at her. What would the king do next? The players informed him that the king had locked himself in a room with a magic stone. and ordered the mages who were supposed to go to the forest to stay and reinforce the barrier with several layers. Miss Loss asked in surprise why the Emperor, who seemed invincible, behaved so cowardly. And the gamers replied that under those circumstances they had few options, no one had attacked this country for hundreds of years. And the barrier that protected it had never been breached before. Miss Lost wondered what Hammer's words meant. The gamers said that someone launched such a powerful attack that it broke through the country's barrier. That's why it worried him so much too. The scene shifted to Tenno, who was with Ko. He held his breath, wondering if the attack had missed, and exhaled with relief. He noticed that what remained of the hesitations could still be used. He suggested that they eat it. He asked the Goni to cut the body, but was not sure if it was not too big for them. Yet he was still impressed by how quickly they worked. While they were carrying the pieces away, it seemed to him that they would definitely use every bit of the body of that flickering creature, and he sincerely wished it to rest in peace. 10 of them were roasting the meat, noting that it seemed to harden during cooking. He wondered how it would taste if it were then dipped in some fruit juice. The wolf curiously asked Ko if he had ever eaten wyvern meat, and Ko replied that it was quite springy, so it was worth trying. But he also smelled the sweet aroma of the food Tino was cooking. Tino felt pressure building inside him. He was a boy. Sweet fruit juice along with a vegetable resembling onion, and that smell was simply stunning. Mixing the roasted wyvern meat with sauce and adding some spices, Tino bit the first piece inside. It would be perfect if this could be eaten with white rice and fresh eggs. Everything was tightly wrapped together. Unfortunately, wyvern meat did not taste like chicken at all, and that disappointed him. Then he noticed that the dolls were roasting some of that meat, so he decided to try. Thinking about it, he recalled a TV show about extracting oil from chameleon seeds, and suddenly argued with himself whether such flowers grow in this world from which the same oil can be pressed. I noticed that the wolves at Karen's were fighting over the roasted meat, and Karen herself insisted that it was hers. One of the wolves told Karen that she was eating too much and there was nothing left for everyone. They asked for bigger portions, and Karen told him to stop pulling and go share with others. In the midst of all this chaos, Tina struggled with himself. He felt that he could not break free from the crowd. He went inside and realized, although it was still impossible to prepare the perfect dish for Good Friday, if he fried those pumpkin-like vegetables, he could make something truly tasty. It was worth trying to extract oil from them. After all, with their help, it was possible to press oil from a wide variety of products, so it was worth trying every available option. Tenonal poured some magic on a few seeds and tasted one. The flavor was different, and he thought that oil could be extracted from it. He tried another one and realized that this one was even better. Just at that moment, spiders appeared. They brought a fruit. Tenno sincerely thanked them and carefully took it to look inside and check the seed. While examining it, he suddenly understood everything and asked the spiders where they had found this fruit. With a glow and following, Tina went with the spiders to the tree where they had gathered the fruits. He noticed how the trees were pressed closely together, but were behind a barrier. He remembered how last time when he tried to expand the barrier, others agreed with him. But he still could not achieve what he wanted. The scene turned to Gamers and Miss Lost. Gamers said that it would take about 10 days to get from the castle entrance to the forest, and to reach the very center of the forest would probably take several more months. Miss Lost did not quite understand what Gamers meant. Gamers explained that the plan was to set fire to the forest from that place, as it might take 3 or even 5 attempts to get it right. And meanwhile, Tenemistot stood on the land of felt, but seemed to be flying over the forest, sending magic to survey the surroundings. One place caught his eye and he immediately became interested. Shine asked what Tenno was doing, and Kuro said it looked like he was leaving birthday wishes on the body. Tenno replied that he would first determine the size of the barrier, then cleanse that area. The scene returned to the king, who sat in the hall with a magic stone and confidently declared that no attack would break his barriers anymore. He believed this would be the last battle the beasts would undertake. Gamers said that with greater power they could guard not only the country, but perhaps the whole world. Meanwhile, Tenno was ready to send the curse back to its source, and do so abundantly. A dazzling light flared around the magic stone. All the sages gasped in shock. Tenno stood still and swore he would never forget the curse that fell on this land. All those curses would soon return to the one who cast them. Above the magic stone appeared a ball of lightning, which fired a series of discharges and struck everyone present. And Tendon announced that the curses over the rivers and lakes would also return, and he cleansed all the trees, their roots, and even the leaves. The color of the magic stone suddenly changed, and the mages and the king were left in shock. Then Tenno felt a strange sensation, as if something inside him was moving. After a few days, Ko was patrolling the area and noticed that it would not be possible to go around it all in one day. The scene shifted a few days back. Everyone felt the approach of a powerful wind and together wondered where did it come from. And suddenly realized the barrier was no longer perceptible to him. The chief pondered whether something had happened to Master Tenno. But when he sharply looked back, his gaze fell on the doll. It was still working. Only then did Tenno appear and ask why everyone had gathered. Ko could not stop thinking that Tenno had so easily defeated the huge obstacle as if it were a trifle, and he was left wondering what was Tenno planning. One day Tina returned home and found a ready wooden floor. It was incredibly spacious. He noticed sliding doors. They were so easy to open and close, as well as doors to every room, even to the toilet and bathroom, just as he had wanted. Looking around, he saw a doll running up to him and calling him excitedly. All she saw was a huge frame of sliding doors that they had built. They brought several stones, and Tenno suddenly realized the doors needed glass. So he used his magic and created it for them. After that, Tenno looked around the living room and found it impeccably clean. He wondered if he could inspect the walls, and the dolls agreed. When he did so, he noticed the walls seemed to be soaked with magic, probably from the dolls and the cells. He thought for a moment to leave everything as it was, but moved on to inspect the oil pressing machine. Using magic, he pressed the machine, and suddenly realized that his powers allowed him to control it even more strongly. Tendon hoped to extract only a little oil, but it turned out better than he expected. The liquid was pleasantly pink and smelled sweet, which intrigued him. Satisfied with the result, he examined all the extracted oil and realized that the extraction machine would need to be improved. He thought about how frying those vegetables, similar to eggplants, turned out incredibly tasty, and wondered if the wolves would like fried vegetables. Maybe they should be served in small portions. Just as Tina was feeding the wolves, Chi approached him. He sincerely thanked because his friends were recovering. But his friend asked if it was really safe to trust a person, and Chi replied with a question. Didn't you feel the gentle magic of Tino? The wolves hesitated a little more, but he smiled, said he was glad to see everyone getting better, and then offered them more food. While they were eating, Tenno noticed that the wolves seemed to really like those vegetables that resembled pumpkins. Softly reminded him that he had not named them yet. So he decided to name them, the male wolves Chaya and Chada. The one that had white spots turned out to be Chara. And the female wolves kept saying, Sao Sao and Sao to me. And the one with red spots and red eyes was Kiza. Tino wanted to weave the kanji ideogram T into their names, and he couldn't help but think that his taste in names was impeccable. Later, Tennel entered another room and saw that the kitchen was shining with cleanliness. The dog served meat to chase after friends who were now happily eating it. Tenno entered the room, sat with the company and others, and with a smile said it was wonderful finally he could fry food. He was still dreaming about the frying pan and was puzzled where to find iron ore when he didn't have a single magnet with him. Suddenly he remembered a magnet in his wallet. Day after day, as soon as they went out, they tirelessly searched for iron ore. Examining the crystals, Tina noticed that he was actually just blindly searching for iron with a small magnet and was glad he remembered the magnet in his wallet. They combed the area inside the barrier, but there were already many caves there. Tina wondered if this area had ever been volcanic. They could not reach the deepest part of the mountain, and meanwhile the 5th day had already passed. He thought about how many places they had already visited. They found a bunch of different stones, but none of them was the ore he was looking for. Although he did not feel very tired, the constant hunting exhausted him, so he decided it was time to return. At that moment he noticed a dark path through the bushes and wondered if it led to another cave. He lit up around himself with magic and stepped onto the path. To his surprise, he came across a structure and wondered if it was an entrance. But there was none of the usual chill that comes at the entrance to a cave. He saw a squirrel with a blue screen and wondered if it was still alive. He used cleansing and touched the animal. But nothing happened. Suddenly, the squirrel broke free and felt. He fixed his gaze on the ground and continued to look at him. He smiled how cute she was, and although wolves usually eat squirrels, it seemed these ones were not even interested in her. He couldn't get rid of the thought, why is that? So he asked Kiza if direwolves usually don't hunt small animals, and Kiza replied that everything was fine with this one. Then the squirrel pointed to her companions and made a short sound, a sign for Tenno. He understood the squirrel was asking him to save her friends. He did it, and in a moment squirrels gathered around him, playing happily with him. He felt there were too many of them. Kiesa nervously urged them to go and help their master. So he let out a roar, the squirrels scattered, and the Tenno sent out a call for help. He thought if there had been only one squirrel, there would have been no problem. When they were returning, Tina thought that they had walked all day, visited 4 different places, and still had no success. He admitted that finding iron ore would not be easy, but they had plenty of time, so they decided to move at their own pace. Finally, they reached the cave where Tenno found Kisa and others, and it turned out it was only 15 minutes from home. They had not yet explored it, but 10 of them thought it was pointless. He noticed a piece of metal and at that moment realized this was exactly what he was looking for. He felt disappointed this key was the closest to his home, and he had wasted all his time on another one. By chance, when Tenno returned home, Karen came back and said that he also did not find any dragons that day. Cole noted that Tenno had just arrived. Karen froze in shock. A squirrel was sitting on her shoulder. This scared the squirrel and it quickly ran away. He realized that the act was a bit childish, and Shuri said that he understood and added that he didn't even know squirrels had entered their home and generally didn't like them much. Tenham, however, pondered, the creatures had increased, would they all be able to get along? Soon the dolls gathered in front of Tenno, and he stood confused, not understanding what they wanted from him. But they led him to the field and he saw. Eagles were here less than 2 months ago, so now only about 10% of the harvest could be gathered. They only helped sow and watered a few times. He wondered if they would also help with the harvest. Looking back, Tenno noticed burnt vegetables, several pumpkins, and a large vegetable resembling a piece of bacon. They were all gigantic. In the kitchen, he cut them up, saying that he had never returned any of them before and everything they couldn't eat went into his compost. The vegetable that looked like a potato was soft and crumbly, smelled sweet, but did not impress in taste, so it was set aside. If all goes well, next time they might be able to add a little more spice. The chief tasted it and exclaimed that it was extraordinarily delicious, wondering how the root could be so sweet. Shuri wondered if the vegetables Tenno brought had increased. Ten also thought that if only they could eat a little more of that. He looked around at the others. He looked at the others and could not understand what they were doing in front of the garden. Lined up in a row, they were chatting about something, and the chief was asking for help with all of this. Tennon did not even have time to blink before the new cultivation map was ready. It stunned him. He was not even asked about it, and later they came across iron ore and smelted a frying pan from it. This scene reminded him of the Direwolves of the times when they fought a long battle with an unknown enemy. When Chase's allies engulfed in darkness attacked him, he lost himself and was ready to die. But when he came to, only a few of his comrades remained, wandering around. They wondered if this shelter was once created by the king, a place where they could hide at least for some time. One of them agreed, let's rest here a bit and prepare to fight the people to the death. After everything, one of them woke up and pondered, had he lost consciousness? He also felt the healing wind and suddenly wondered, could it be magic? His body became lighter and his thoughts clearer. He called the others, asking if they were still alive. Although he was not in the best condition, the healing wind gave him strength to catch small prey. Looking around in the forest, he noticed that the Mayasimi had disappeared and wondered if the threat had passed. Another wolf approached him and said he would go hunting together with the first wolf. The first wolf sincerely thanked him and said they also needed to think about helping the other comrades. And at that very moment, they heard a sound coming from the entrance. And it was Cheyenne Ko who struck them all. They said that it could not be the dark wolf, he was too huge. And there was also a spider. When he approached Tenno, they stunnedly called him an enemy. But as soon as Ko and Chi looked at them, the two immediately seemed frightening. The scene shifted to the present. Tenant was left in shock, seeing that Conch had become significantly bigger. He wondered why, when they cultivated the land and harvested the crops, everything had to be carefully studied by trial and error. To change the pace a bit, Ten decided to use the materials they found while exploring the caves. He even learned that little spiders could release threads. Chai also possessed magic, and Tina could not help but wonder had Chai herself and her companions transformed or evolved. There were puppies in the cave, and Tenon noticed that they seemed to have lost the will to fight. Without hesitation, he decided to cast Purify, dispel, heal, and cleanse on everyone. The wolf whispered that the power he used was the same healing wind that filled the entire forest. They said in unison that their master had cleansed the forest and returned their strength. The wolf even froze in surprise, thinking it was true, and the king of the forest raised his eyes to their master, who was such a good, magical creature. Tenno looked at Chai and at first thought that he looked more like a dog than a human. He wanted Chai to stay that small forever, because he was scared and humiliated when people looked down on him. They all went home to their house built into a giant rock, and the wide area around it was completely cleared. Tina said that he still could not fully comprehend how wild that place was, and wondered if the field in the middle of their home had simply turned into a forest by itself. It seemed. That morning everything was as usual, nothing strange. Chief warmly greeted Tenno and said that they had definitely followed the Golan's instructions, planting all the trees in one place that would bear the fruits Tenno wanted. He thanked his clan for their hard work, and Shuri added that his clan worked several times harder than Chief's plan required. The terrible walls even trembled with shock upon seeing the giant insects, and some even fainted. Then Tenno looked into the forest and saw that it was well cared for. Besides the plants he had planted, about 90 known species of trees grew here, and almost 200 trees bore fruit generously. It was impressive, and now they had 30 plants that gave wonderful fruits. He could not comprehend how they managed to plant all of this in just half a day. He went to the kitchen, saying that if he needed tools, he could make wine even from grates. They also needed to praise the vegetables from the land they had just cultivated, since they planned to use them as seasoning. And now they also had an iron cauldron. Almost a month passed before he forged a frying pan from iron ore. He easily recognized useful stones and metal ores, including a universal stone, which he used to replace coal in the house and used for his one-eyed gom. It was easy to process and had magical properties. Although iron was difficult to produce, he still managed to make the kitchen utensils he wanted. Tools made from silver and gold ores were much stronger, but creating them required significantly more magic. These materials were especially suitable for glass windows and knives, and surprisingly, had low thermal conductivity. He picked up a stone and said that the blue and red glowing ores they found, while exploring the cave, seemed to be very much liked by the fluffies. He used them to make a semi-transparent bottle, but over time it lost its shine. He collected stones, even magical ones that enhanced they were consistently found in the hearts of certain monsters, and he was sure they would become even more useful someday. The taste of Irish potatoes, resembling cobblestones, was barely noticeable, but they could be made into flour. He learned to do this by watching television, so it should be quite simple. Now he only had to grate the potato on a silver grater. He dipped the mixture and saying that next they would wrap the grated potato in a dry cloth and squeeze it tightly, showed how a white fluffy mass appeared. And so they left it for 20 minutes, then poured out the water. He repeated this process. He soaked the potato in water and each time drained the liquid, causing more and more lumps to collect at the bottom. Then he placed the hardened lumps from the bottom of the container onto 2 plates to dry. He continued this method and eventually succeeded. Looking around, he noticed that new lumps lay on top, while others, though rare, were also on the outside. When everyone settled into their houses, loneliness overwhelmed him, especially because the houses were so large, and there were even more dolls around. Next, he decided to cook some rabbit meat because at that moment, it most resembled chicken. He rubbed it with salt, coated it in flour, and then cooked it in an iron pot. The pot felt different, but soon he gathered courage. When he tasted it, he was deeply moved and realized that nothing compares to courage. Taking another bite, he suddenly noticed a spider crawling toward him. He offered it some food and whispered that no one should find out about it. Then he stood up and moved forward, a little scared, and quietly added that he would save the rest of the flour. While waiting, it occurred to him to cut the sweet and bitter scraps. He realized that he could probably make sugar from them, and suddenly remembered how his mother once made sugar from beetroot. It turned out that there was a lot of residue collected there. Because of it, the mixture became bitter. He removed the foam and continued heating the mixture until it began to thicken and finally turned purple. He did not stop. He cut off the hardened parts and spread them over a wide surface to cool. When he tasted it, the sweetness hit his face, and behind it were deep, rich umami notes. Outside, a strange beast was watching them. Go caught the smell of food and happily said that apparently their master was already preparing the next lunch. And Chair noted that although he had never smelled such a sweet scent before, it intrigued him greatly. When Karen arrived, a colleague gloomily informed her that nothing had worked out again. Heron, not understanding what he was talking about, replied that she combed every corner of the barrier every day, and Kaja, sitting relaxed, added that they properly guarded their master. 10 of them came with food and said that it was time to eat. Everyone gathered to eat, and Tennu explained that he decided to mix the sugar he made that day with the fish sauce that was earlier. It turned out to be teriyaki for red meat. He said enthusiastically that the taste was simply incredible. Words cannot describe it, and Ko agreed. The taste is truly amazing. Like Karen H., she joyfully noted that all those hard efforts finally paid off. She worked tirelessly, flying through the miasma in search of dragons. Chur said anxiously that lately he has been feeling the presence of a dragon very clearly, and it is strange that it has not been found yet. Karen agreed that should be good news, but finding a dragon is not easy. Karen from OT said indignantly that he makes too many excuses. The chief intervened. No argument, Karen does everything she can. Karen replied that they should be grateful for that. It was then that they noticed the beast sneaking up on the tenor unnoticed by everyone and starting to eat the food. Everyone instantly realized that before them was an earth dragon, and Tenno explained it. It turned out that the drying had joined them quite recently. While Fluffy was flying in the sky, the dragon flew away, and Tenno noticed that he could fly without flapping his wings. He seemed different, but perhaps Fluffy and the dragon were of the same species. He could not understand why he had previously assumed that they were of the same species. An ordinary dog in the house was completely frightened by what was happening right in front of him. Meanwhile, in the castle, the room with the magic stone was heavily damaged. The stones were completely covered with scratches. The king carefully examined him, thinking that the barrier was fine. One of his men said it was impossible, but the mages would find the problem within a month. Had those 4 forgotten that they were entrusted with the blessing of the royal magic stone? The mages thought the king was right. Once when the king was testing his magic stone, he cast an unaging spell on them. The chief mage believed that now they were reaping what they had sown. Only those 4 knew that all the lives sacrificed to the magic stone were used to extend their own days and maintain the barrier. Then they sincerely believed power is justice. Then the sorcerer said that the world would never forgive them. He left. They thought that the forest kings trembled and restrained the power of the magic stone, which meant the forest had become a threat to the country. He thought about how many more lives would have to be sacrificed to restore the magic stone, and he thought that the country had now brought upon itself the wrath of the whole world. The chief, standing in the field near the stone house, looked closely at the small spiders and noticed that lately it seemed the children had begun to manipulate their features. Their main strategy was simple: to dress in hellfire and defeat the enemy with speed, or at least that was how it was supposed to be. Every time the master saw them, he seemed to send an image of himself controlling the threads, and the elder asked the children if they had tried it. He realized, instead of just running, they could catch prey by releasing threads faster. It seemed they had honed their skills to the point that they could even set traps. The main guest decided to try it himself and thought their idea was truly brilliant. Tennu called the dragon a flying lizard, but felt that this nickname did not suit at all. It was so hot that he couldn't come up with anything decent. But was it even a lizard from the very beginning? Then he remembered Kanako because of her brown color, and since she even resembled a dinosaur, names like Rex or Tira came to his mind. He invented one name after another, but the dragon did not react at all. However, but as soon as he called it a flying lizard again, the dragon barely twitched, continuing. When it was time to give names, Ten also decided to name the dogs and without hesitation named the leader, I. The male dogs were named Sora and Nu, and the females Amy, Ayu, and Myra. He was sincerely proud of giving them such beautiful names. The colors of the dogs resembled indigo blue, and they all loved almost equally, so he had to be very careful not to confuse them. Then he jumped into the lake to swim, saying it was so cool, but he was also incredibly hot. It seemed the temperature reached about 40 degrees Celsius, and he wondered if it was summer there in that world. Then he floated on the water, noticing that the river flowing through the forest was simply wonderful. And he was quite surprised they had almost built everything right up to the river itself. The fields and gardens were getting bigger and bigger. He raised his eyes to the sky. Their two wolves were flying, carrying trees with their magic. Tina understood how they moved the trees. He thought that both trees and the walls seemed to be flying, and that made the world incredible. Exhausted by the summer heat sighed, the seasons seemed to have faded since ancient times, and he believed it was because of the power of their master. Che recalled. He felt it for the first time and now knew how merciless summer heat could be. In response, they said it was really hard to endure. But he noticed that the chief looked very lively at that moment. Che said it was no wonder from the one called the Keeper of Death. Even King Fenrir could not withstand such hellish heat. Kogral said he could cool himself with his magic, but in fact after such a long time he was enjoying this hot wave. The chief barely glanced at him, then immediately asked, "Don't you think something is wrong?" As if our lord is not feeling well, and he agreed, saying he was thinking the same thing. He began to feel dizzy, and he thought that soon he needed to get out of the water. Suddenly he wondered, what was he riding on? Looking around, it seemed to him that it could be. It was in Amba, but somehow different. The small eyes did not seem evil, on the contrary it felt pleasant and cool, so he decided that everything was fine with it. And just then someone appeared, spoke his language, and said that Tennu was playing with water spirits. They were attracted by pure magical energy. But even they had never seen such a large group before. A person warned Tino not to give them too much mana. At that moment Tino suddenly spit something out, and the chief became worried whether he was unwell. Ko also came to check, but Tina reassured them he was fine. When he started preparing food, Tina was calm. "I can't believe it, the meat and potatoes you had been cooking since early morning were eaten in an instant." Everyone rushed for the food, and he thought about whether to cook 3 times as much next time. He estimated that at least 3 large pots would be needed, maybe even 5. He added that if the one-eyed Galem helped in the kitchen, they could have avoided such a fuss. For this to work, he would need a larger cooking space and more coal. Golden shops, the heat was so unbearable that he could not think clearly, and it seemed like his head was spinning. The action moved to the castle, where a whole crowd of slaves stood before a group of mages. One of the mages threw, "There are definitely 100 of them," and ordered to send them to the magical treasury. With such a number, they should be able to fix the magic stone. One more. For mage consider the situation and suggest that they assess the progress and increase the required amount. He coldly reminded the others that these slaves were born for only one purpose: to be expendable warriors. Researchers, materials for research, or workers performing the lowest tasks. It was like that in their country. Whoever raised their voice even once was publicly executed, so now no one dared to speak. In fact, many considered it a necessary sacrifice for a life of abundance. Such was the reality of the nation in which they lived. Meanwhile, Tenno was sailing down the river on the amoeba and admiring the sun. He thought that there seemed to be no fever, but the heat probably prevented him from sleeping. He felt pleased and relaxed. I heard a rustle and saw gallums, little ants and spiders working. He thought that by playing day after day, his heart would eventually bake, and he keeps playing. He decided not to leave the river and instead focused on finding ways to prevent the curse. Whether people existed at all in that world is unknown, but when it comes to curses, the culprits were usually people. Somewhere they might have existed, he thought, although he felt that they were not in the forest. On the contrary, when the whole world seemed like just a forest, it only convinced him more that people must exist. He desperately wanted to see them right in front of him, and his thoughts kept returning again and again to the curse. Meanwhile, the castle slaves were being dragged to the room of the magic stone. Ten thought that in Japan curses usually target a specific person. Although a place could be completely cursed, he considered this only his theory. Could this place really be cursed, maybe by spirits tied to the land? He looked at the lizard and muttered that it couldn't be so. Somehow this situation was starting to seem strangely amusing. But the scariest thing was that the shadow clung to them. They began to suspect that the Kohen Karon were possessed by it. If they found him, it would need to be cleansed immediately. Possession hung in the air. Shuri and others were consumed by a fierce curse. There was no question of crime here. A curse itself is neither good nor bad. The wolves were lurking around and suddenly together felt a strange tingling. Tennu explained that when someone is possessed, it gradually eats them away, and he began to doubt whether it was a curse or something demonic. And even about whether cleansing would help against demons, he was no longer sure. Where demons were summoned by victims, using that power to take over the world. It sounded like a scene from that movie he once saw. The heat was so unbearable that he felt dizzy, but he didn't care. Both were enemies, and he decided to eliminate them. Then he suddenly understood everything, and he felt strangely amused. To prevent the arrival of demons, what magical circles are actually needed for their summoning? He could not imagine what that magical circle would look like. If it is not a demon but just a curse, wouldn't it be better to strike at the very root, whether it is a person or a thing? But if it really was about victims, it could become deadly dangerous, so first they needed to find a way to deal with it. The scene shifted to how slaves were killed. One of the mages thought to himself, just activate the technique and everything will be resolved. Only one thing remained: to find out the cause and not give in to emotions in such a place. Tennu felt a strange shift in his thoughts as he looked at the magical circles. He knew little about them, so he imagined a black stone, but the thought that the criminal died and the victim was placed in that stone left a bitter taste in his mouth. He decided to put them to sleep, and while doing so, he thought it was worth making them completely forget the method. Erasing memories seemed the best way out. If it was a curse, dealing with it would be too troublesome, so he decided to imagine the black stone again and double the retribution, as he had done before. Then he would seal it forever so that the curse would never escape, as if it became part of the sanctuary. Meanwhile, the mage in the castle, under our incantation chants, pours all his power into the magic stone. He abruptly activated his magic, releasing a powerful burst of energy into the sky. At the very same moment, the magic stone and the castle itself stirred. Energy burst from them, and everyone jumped back in shock. The slaves looked around confusedly, and the mages could not find words. Their spells were clearly disrupted. Even the chief mage fell. The chief mage Biff quickly rushed to use his power, trying to heal the magic stone. 10 of his thoughts sharply lined up into a clear picture as he guessed what the mage was doing. Suddenly his mind cleared, and he wondered if the previous confusion was due to dehydration. He stood up, telling himself he would go to bed earlier, and suddenly it dawned on him. He could simply use magic to cool the house. Why hadn't he thought of this before? The scene shifted to the slaves. The guards were leading them through the forest, and some of them were already among the trees. Wounded and exhausted, they reached the kingdom of Antor, a country neighboring the empire of Enwella, begging for help, while King Ismelade suspected. Were these escaped slaves from the empire or perhaps spies? One of his knights noted that the slave crests, which once were symbols of the empire's power, no longer adorned them. Meliod asked if Knight was sure about this, and she replied that the court mage was just interrogating the slaves. One of the slaves lay on the bed and quietly explained that they were part of a detachment sent to scout the forest. They were soldier slaves allowed to speak only by order, so they chose their words carefully, but everything around seemed strange and distant to them. Suddenly, a white light surged upon them, and their senses quickly returned. At that moment, everyone rushed to flee. Sanlid asked how long ago this had happened. The slaves replied that they had been wandering the forest for about a month. While Ismelio was fervently consulting with the ministers, one of them said that a strange light had blossomed in the forest a month ago, and another pondered whether this was the work of the empire. Smelly explained that although they shared a border with the empire of Enwella, they managed to repel attacks because the forest served as a natural buffer, and someone suggested considering giving this forest more value. Another person agreed, saying it was not worth looking too deeply into this. Then a nobleman Ismelate stood up and said that they needed to dig deeper. If they found the first slave who managed to break the crest, it might hint at how to resist the empire of Enwella. Finally, Amigal spoke, and it seemed he was just looking for an excuse to study magic. Amigal quickly responded, insisting that this was not his intention at all. Even this stinker admitted that it was still a good opportunity. He said that they would finally conduct the long-overdue forest survey because he was curious about what was really going on there. Meanwhile, they were harvesting a crop in the forest that resembled grapes. Tina noted that the harvest was successful, and he hurried to gather the harvest before the heat became even stronger. He brought baskets with attached dolls and all the necessary tools to stuff everything into them. He said that since the brilliant idea came to his mind to slightly cool the air around his body, he had been feeling much better. Last time he almost caught heat stroke, and although he had a vague memory as if he activated some magic, it was quite possible that he actually did. He could not recall the details, and his body suddenly became strangely light. Ko approached him and he hugged Ko tightly, feeling that since then someone was always by his side. Then he asked the beasts not to crowd around him, thinking whether they were hunting for the fruit, but he knew they would not get it. It was as if everyone was avoiding him and saying in unison that their master seemed unchanged. The leader said that the magical path was not an easy matter. I tend to think that Tennu was so exhausted due to excessive use of his magic both in the barrier and in the golems, because it probably consumes a lot of energy. Suddenly, a huge wave of pure magic burst forth. Sheer admitted that he had never seen or heard anything like it before. Anno, the sudden loss of magical power could have been fatal, and no one even imagined that it was possible at all. Ko approached Tenno, feeling that his magic seemed to have stabilized. Tenno told him not to do this. Cole looked at the grapes and noticed that now he could make wine, realizing that he had been so focused on the essentials that he hardly thought about anything else. As soon as he heard the word wine, he lit up, gathered all the bunches into one big barrel and said that actually he preferred beer but did not know how to make it with wine. It was simpler, only barrels were needed. And the gansy began to crush the grapes with their feet in a clean trough. Although the work was hard, it still brought joy. Then they collected the juice into barrels, and Tenno explained that once the juice was in his possession, he would let it ferment, then pour it into clean jars and take them to the cellar where the temperature was stable. These clusters looked like others, but fermented on their own thanks to the same natural yeasts living on their skin. Now he needed to make barrels, and fortunately he had plenty of firewood. After 6 months, he felt that the work was difficult for him. The wood was hard, and bending it easily did not work because he had chosen too tough a species. He tried with all his might to make them the same, and just when he thought he had succeeded, the barrels collapsed due to a leak. The time has come for a new approach. Tino has since been cutting trees differently. He drove up to him, said they had been watching him for a long time, and asked what he was busy with today. Tino explained that first the bark needs to be removed, then dry it. Shuri, impatient to try the finished product, said he did not know what Tino was doing but wanted to taste that sweet thing, though secretly he did not like sweets. Shura emphasized that those gansy just watch. Ko noted that this is by no means like today's food. Karen the Inquisitive asked what Tina does. Ten Alm pointed to a huge tree and said that he planned to saw it into slices 1 meter high. He intended to use teleportation magic to turn them into barrels and knock out all the insides. He did this every month. The process was extremely convenient, and now he just had a machine near the bun. He lined up all the barrels in the basement, thinking that first he needed to expand the space. The action shifts to the kingdom of Enwelis. The king attacked the mage and shouted why he could not fix the magic stone. The sage replied that they had tried many times but each time failed, and the mage who tried to fix it lost all memories and all his magic. The king snorted contemptuously. This is a simple matter they had done many times. If there are not enough slaves, breed more and try again. The sage warned, if they do not find the root of the problem, it will happen again. The king asked what happened to the wizards who tried to fix it. The major replied that they are all locked in their rooms. The king ordered them executed, coldly stating that he does not tolerate incompetence. The mage, stunned, objected, saying that he served the king faithfully. The king ignored him and ordered the knights to immediately go and execute him. The knight retreated. The king sat on the throne and ordered the mage to immediately restore the magic stone. The mage agreed and left the room. The irritated king thought about the futility of the barrier made of magic stones and about the fact that the cracks could not be fixed. He felt as if he was missing something. He cursed the fools who had let him down, but despite everything, he was still overwhelmed by a fearful dread at the very thought of lightning. He pondered what he would do when he finally found the source of it. For a moment he imagined an attack from another country hiding behind the forest, but quickly he dismissed that thought. No, they were cowards lacking the strength to withstand the strongest. His irritation only grew, so he ordered the knights to entertain him. Soon many slaves were brought to him. The king noticed that he had not done this for a long time, and in such times it was best to torment a few slaves. He drew his sword and said that if the mage thought the king would tire of such matters after centuries, he was mistaken. He was only beginning. The players could not believe it. He was going to watch the king do it again. From the day he, full of hopes and dreams, became a knight, he stood honorably guarding the king. But he never got used to it before. He knew he shouldn't, but he had no force capable of stopping the king, who simultaneously held both the sword and the barrier in his hands. After centuries, fueled by the lives of victims, that sinister magical sword became the most powerful of all. Players shuddered every time the king drew the sword. The king, with a cruel smile, said they should rejoice, for soon the slaves would merge with his sword. The slaves trembled, but no one dared utter a word. Suddenly, the king's sword began to glow, and this confused the slaves and even the king himself. Someone swung a sword and struck the king's sword, and the gamers immediately realized This was an enemy attack. He instantly ordered the knights to protect the king. They rushed forward, but there was no sign of the enemy anywhere. The players felt anxiety as if something was wrong. The mage shouted to the king, who was completely stunned. They did not calm down, spoke to him again and again, and the king stood stunned. What were they saying, and why had he dropped his sword? Suddenly something touched his body and caused a burning pain. He demanded they stop touching him, but when he looked at his hand, he saw it was bleeding, and not understanding why, asked the sage to heal him. The king was sure that powerful protective spells had been cast on him, and just as he remembered his sword, the sage urged him persistently not to get up yet. The king wondered what had happened, night game approaching. He told him that there were no signs of the enemy. The timers agreed, still not believing that they had managed to wound their king. Then he released the mages and asked if he could examine the sword. The mage agreed, and the gamers, looking at the blade, couldn't help but wonder if it was the same sinister magical sword. However, he felt no power from it. It was just an ordinary old sword. He noticed a rope wrapped around it and could only say that it resembled ordinary grass. He wasn't sure, but it seemed like the same material that wrapped the magical stone. He thought it was an attack from the forest, just like the one that happened with the magical stone, and couldn't understand why they were doing it. They clearly knew too little. He realized that he needed to learn more before making a decision. Someone spoke up and asked, "Who are you and what are you?" They wanted something from him. The gamers guessed what it was about, and the sage explained that the servant had activated the king's sword, and the king had remained like that since he woke up. The gamers suddenly understood it was the same thing that happened to the mage who tried to fix the stone. Maybe it was because both tried to make a sacrifice, and was it connected to that ominous premonition he had just felt? He looked at the slaves, then at the wall where a crack appeared, and thought that maybe, just maybe, the king could still be stopped. The gamers remembered that in childhood he had read his grandfather's fairy tales. In one of them there was a description of a forest, where the trees gently swayed in the wind, and the forest kept its blessings for the people. He remembered how once a werebeast saved him when he was traveling there. He envied how in that story it was described as if some even saw the kings of the forest. The players had long wanted to see them too, but because of the current state of the country, he could not discuss such thoughts with anyone. The scene shifted to the present. Gamal stood, clearly irritated. The gamers immediately noticed something was clearly troubling him. Someone commented that what an interesting and pleasant coincidence to run into gamers right here. Gamers noticed that Gamal seemed not to want to be here and looked very upset. Demal admitted he hoped to finally break away into the forest and give himself freedom, but he was held back. He wanted to hunt beasts. Then the man recalled the incident with the king and sadly warned them to be careful. Gamble nodded at the warning, said once again that he wanted to let loose, and left. Gamer thought about how to use the situation to his advantage, but first he needed to check one thing. He then set out to borrow some slaves. When Gamers entered the hall, he was immediately hit by a strange smell, and the man apologized, explaining that the cleaner had not come on time, and remembers how he looked at the slaves and chose a few for himself. The man asked if the Gamers planned to cut them all down, noting that there were almost no slaves left, so they asked that the Gamers leave a few women here. He, calling them Gamers' refuse, explained that they were needed for a special mission and that he might have to borrow them again, so he asked the man to mark them for future use. Audience. A light breeze instantly brought a cozy time. Ten of Stud looked at the sky and said he was right. Seeing the wheat in their fields, he felt great joy. It was a distant place he noticed when expanding the barrier, and the 1.5-day journey was worth it. When she approached him, Tenno immediately felt that she was happy too. For a moment, Ten thought about whether the wheat was really as tasty as it seemed. He thought that if Karen were here, she would definitely eat it. Shine replied that their master can make anything tasty. Tenno admired the weakling and said it looked exactly as it should. Maybe it was Wayne who brought the seeds there from somewhere. He tried, then ordered the others to hold the tops of the plants, while he himself harvested with magic. Together they harvested the wheat. Everyone continued to help Tenno, and he was grateful that there were grains in the world and hoped to use them to prepare something tasty. As soon as he finished, he realized that everyone around was probably worried, so he suggested returning home. Jokingly, Hio sat down and asked Tenno to climb onto his back, saying it would be faster that way. Stunned yet still considered it amazing. It seemed that climbing like this was perfectly normal. Haiwa agreed, and as Tenno mounted, Haiwa rushed into the sky, lifted by magic. They flew at incredible speed, and Tina shuddered at how swiftly they flew. It was both thrilling and scary. When they returned, Ko met them, and noticing that Tenno had been absent for almost 2 days, anxiously asked where he had been. Tenno smiled in a way that reassured him, saying he had already returned. Hio, noticing Ko's concern, explained that he had anticipated Ko's reaction and brought Tenno home as quickly as possible. Ko thanked them, and Tenno noted with surprise that they had returned in just 3 hours, covering a distance that usually takes more than a day. Meanwhile, the action shifted to the king. He ordered Gamal, as soon as his night order was ready, to march to conquer the forest and bring him those who dared to oppose him. Gamal responded passionately. He had long awaited such orders and swore to capture everyone who stood against the king and bring them to the king. He told Gamel to take whatever he wanted. Gamel, in response, asked for several wizards and slaves. The king inquired if the game had any plan, and Gamma calmly replied that he would take as much as he needed. When Gamma left the room, the king reproached himself. He should have expelled him earlier. He announced that the fifth commander would take over their duties. At that moment night came, and apologizing, he handed over the report from the overseer of the slaves. They gestured to prompt him to speak, asked what it was about, but he looked completely indifferent. The knight explained that some slaves had begun to behave quite differently. The king asked if there was something wrong with the coats of arms. But the knight clarified the report did not even mention those coats of arms. The king, gloomy and deeply lost in thought, ordered to kill and replace all the slaves who showed those changes because he was trembling with impatience and could not wait to see whom Gamble would bring back. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Tenno. He was carrying a basket filled with fruits and said that yesterday was hard, but flying in the sky was incredible. He would like to try it again, but more slowly. As he walked, he noticed fallen trees and thought that they had already begun to rot. At first, he attributed it to imagination, but it seemed as if everything was decomposing much faster than in Japan. Usually compost became suitable in about a month, but here probably 2 weeks would be enough. Meanwhile, looking more closely, he noticed that one pile had been reworked with magic, while the other was left to decompose naturally, and it was clear. The one that rotted naturally had a better color and smell. He watched as the gallons carried away the fruits, and said that he had also tested the compost on vegetables. Those grown on natural compost were clearly better in color. The texture and density of the steam were noticeably different. He realized, if he managed to properly set up the compost, there would be no need to worry about food. Once he believed that magic was omnipotent, but when it came to vegetables and compost, microbes played the decisive role, and he began to wonder, does magic have any effect on living beings? This meant that natural fermentation might be better suited for making fish toss and wine, and he thought it best to check the wine as soon as possible. At the thought of wine, he became excited and almost surprisingly felt a slight tremor in his hands. "What's wrong with me?" he said aloud, shaking his head, and 10 of them began to prepare. Choosing combinations of dishes, he wondered whether to cook meat on charcoal or with magic, compared both methods, and decided to try vegetables grown with magic as well. After trials, he understood. The less magic used in growing and cooking vegetables, the better the result. When there is too much magic, the texture becomes spongy and the taste spoils. He had plenty of time, so he decided to slowly grow vegetables and cook them the old way. He ate, telling himself that today he would not rush and would process the wheat. Then he set about thrashing the wheat, which had dried well in the wind. It was so fun and easy. The next day, he set aside the earnings for their next sowing and its care. Carefully removed those large, unwanted pieces. The gallons helped him, and he sincerely thanked them for their assistance. Then he had to rub the wheat between 2 boards to remove the husks. He wondered if it would be easier to cut grooves in the boards, but despite all their efforts, even after 3 hours they had not finished. The sight of the Gauland's work reminded them that they still needed to winnow the chaff for this. The wheat must be dropped from a height, and the wind allowed to carry away the husks. But some of the chaff had not yet separated, so he thought that maybe it was worth strengthening the wind. He did this and everything got mixed up again. He apologized to the Gons for the mistake and tried. Again, Tenno said that although it took quite a long time, now it was time to dry the wheat well before grinding it into flour. He decided to do this in the living room where no one would disturb. He asked the Gallons to watch over it so the squirrels would not eat it. It was then that Kuro appeared and asked if he could eat the wheat. Tenno replied that for now it was forbidden to touch it. Kuro intervened and sharply told Kuro not to cause problems for their master. Kuro, interested, asked if Ko did not think about what their master had been working on all the time. Covert replied that it was probably what people grow grain, and he had never tasted it before. He was sure that their master would share it with them sooner or later, so they should not behave so humiliatingly. The Gallons listened without looking away and continued in chorus, saying that their master was preparing dishes they could not even imagine. They recalled the snake dish that Tenno had prepared, and this made him feel the weight of their watchful eyes on him. Feeling the pressure, Tenno lay down, looked closely at the grains, and mentally decided, as soon as the flour ripens, the first thing he will need to do is bake bread. To bake bread, he needed yeast, and he realized he would have to make it himself. This reminded him of his sister, who was obsessed with baking bread and had previously forced him to make yeast for her. He decided to think about it only after the flour was ready. He recalled that he did not have proper baking equipment, and suddenly, as if enlightened, whispered that in the kitchen he only had a stove. He would have to turn his wooden terrace into a pizza oven. Fortunately, after excavating the wine cellar, he had plenty of stones left. Lay a layer of golden metal, let it insulate the wooden decking and foundation. It turned out to be incredibly strong. The dog was shocked, watching how his Tenno used or chalcum so carelessly. Tenno explained that the foundation needed to be lower than the decking, and shaped just like the one he had seen on television. After long and hard efforts, you finally built it. He cooked food in the oven and thought, I wonder if he can enhance its flavor with hot coals. After toasting, he gave everyone a portion, and after trying it himself, decided it was simply incredibly delicious. They both noticed that the meat became even more appetizing and that only the change in cooking method altered its texture. And Karen added that it was chewy and a bit bitter, but reminded her of her comrade's favorite way of grilling on lava. Ken smiles, satisfied with the results. He accomplished a lot that day, so after dinner he decided to go to bed immediately. At that very moment, Sherry ran in and joyfully announced that the little ones who went out with the master had returned and brought back prey. It turned out to be an evil snake and they wanted Tenno to cook it for them. Everyone looked at him, and Tenno was both surprised and intrigued. The scene shifted to the castle, where Miss Lost watched as people bustled and prepared to set out, and he noticed that they were taking many sorcerers and slaves with them. They were all determined to fulfill the king's wish. This lost wonder found itself in the midst of a loud storm when the fifth commander intervened. Those four. It seemed the forest could really fall, but the hammers stubbornly denied that it was possible. He thought that from that incident he only had 10 days to prepare, and he wanted to save more slaves. When they left the castle, Gamel loudly asked if they could move faster. With such a large caravan, it would take them half a month to reach the forest by Saturday. The man replied that they would have less to carry on the way back, so they would arrive faster. They noticed and agreed that they would manage this by winter. The frame shifted to Tenno. He gathered wheat into a small bag. He used magic and instantly turned the wheat into flour, planning later when he had time to make millstones. The flour was a bit brown, but he hoped it would still be usable. That day he decided to make a starter. First, he washed the bottle and 2 spoons, then mixed the starter with water. 1 spoon of flour with water. He covered it with a cloth lid and left it to stand at room temperature. It was already quite warm, so everything should turn out as needed. After a day, he stirred in 2 more spoons of flour and water. And waited another day. To his joy, it began to bubble and everything was going smoothly. Now he only had to regularly add flour and pour in water, carefully watching it in the refrigerator. Because in this world fermentation went faster, so he decided to proceed step by step. Looking at those gallons, he suddenly realized he had measured the ingredients incorrectly, so he decided to make scales. He was going to make 2 identical stones to use them as weights, He evenly divided one in half, then cut each half again into quarters. Now he could measure the ingredients precisely. The starter seemed ready. It was time to get to the bread. The 10 of us decided to use freshly milled flour for this batch. He vigorously mixed 1 part water and starter with 2 parts flour, added 1 part sugar per 10 parts water and a pinch of salt. He kept working, thinking to himself, and if he remembered correctly, this was exactly the balance. He dissolved the sugar in barely warm water and added the starter. Fermentation had already begun, and now he needed to add flour and salt while kneading the dough. Tino was sure he was doing everything right, and he focused so much on mixing until everything became a single mass. While working, he noticed the dough looked wonderful. The next step was to keep kneading, and he knew this was the most important part of the process, so without stopping, he glanced at the gnomes and wondered what they were up to. Dogs and wolves watched him with curiosity, and Tino explained that he was baking bread for a tasty result. After finishing kneading, he felt exhausted but satisfied. Then he ordered the gallons to stop for a moment. The dough needed to be covered with a damp cloth and left to rise. While the dough rested, the 10 decided to go for fruit. He said that once the dough doubled in size, it needed to be kneaded again, then allowed to rise a second time before shaping for baking. And when he returned, he showed the fruit to the gallons and asked if they could eat it. After work, he checked the dough, carefully divided it into equal portions, and put them in the oven to bake. The animals watched intently and in one voice remarked that they were curious about what Tenno had been doing the last few days. Now a wonderfully delicious smell was in the air, one he had never smelled before, and Shuri asked aloud if it was from the grain the little ones went to gather, but Shiv just waved it off. He wouldn't even guess what it could be. At 10 o'clock, he glanced at the oven. 10 minutes had already passed, so everything should be ready. He took out the bread, bit into it, and felt crispy on the outside, chewy inside, just the way real bread should be. Karen, after biting his piece, enthusiastically said it was incredible, confessed as if he had never known anything so tasty existed. Someone added that Karen clearly loves seeds in bread, and another disagreed, saying it was simply good as befits their master. Ko then said that maybe it was worth reconsidering his opinion about human wisdom. But the chief disagreed. He replied that Tenno was amazing simply because of who he was. Tenno smiled to himself, feeling as if the animals were enjoying the bread. He thought that if he had cheese and butter, he could make pizza. And he also wanted to try making pancakes with just water, flour, and jam. Eggs and milk would be perfect. He looked at the gnomes. They silently placed more bread in front of him. Tenno wondered what they had planned. They left without saying a word, simply quietly leaving him alone with his thoughts. The next morning, Tina woke up to a chill in the air, although it was still only autumn outside. That morning, he found a fresh loaf of bread and Tasting it, he was surprised to find that it had become fluffier and much tastier than what he had made himself. Tino went outside and immediately felt a piercing cold in the air. It seemed the weather was swinging between extremes. He threw a question to the gongs, who hadn't seen the boss for a long time, and thoughtfully asked if they had gone underground to hibernate like Shuri and the ants. He decided to take on all the household chores that needed to be done. Looking at those gallons, he wondered, are they still transporting wheat because then he could grind it? To his surprise, he found that the wheat had already been processed by magic. The snack supplies were melting before his eyes, but there were still enough jars of fish sauce and even more sugar. He sincerely thanked the gongs for making salt and oil. Suddenly, the idea came to make stone trinkets. While he was thinking about this, one of the gallons approached to take over the work, and Tino tried to insist that everything was fine and that he could handle the first batch himself. Yet the brave one took the task from him, and Tino, seeing no point in resisting, agreed. Had nothing else to do, so he finally decided to do a major kitchen renovation, which he had long planned, took it beyond the mountain and tripled the space. He even installed a new stove, laid out an entire wall of stones for a barbecue, and set up a pizza oven. He imagined how very soon he would be able to wash vegetables in piles. When everything was ready, he prepared food and served it to the golems. He looked with relief the exhausting struggle was finally over. He looked at Shura and the chief, wondering why they were not falling into hibernation. They did not say a word and left with the little ones, and Tennu could not get rid of the thought. Maybe they just went out to eat something fried. Some Goldem approached Tennu, showed him how many barrels they had, and then raised a wooden cup filled with wine. Tennu said that it was already done, and noted that the wine would mature quickly. He felt a pleasant aroma, and the taste turned out to be slightly dry and gently sweet. But it was very good. Drinking alone might seem a bit lonely, but he drank that night. Suddenly, he noticed that 3 wolves from that fight were arguing about who was the strongest, and it stunned him. He could not understand what had just happened. Just as Tennu was trying to stop them, Chi intervened in the fight and declared himself the strongest. Tenchudes could not understand what was happening. Suddenly, he noticed Guln was pouring wine for everyone, and Tennu had nothing left to do but watch. The chief told Shura that they would settle it now, to which Shura resolutely replied that he never loses to the chief. The lodger noticed there is no magic. Did they really have to sleep? At that very moment, he noticed that someone had fallen into the river, and realized that now peaceful drinking was out of the question. When he said that Karen was clearly tipsy, he saw her head was in the barrel. She had fallen right in there. She was grateful that Fluffy and the last lizard were still in the warm-up. Ko approached, asked for more, enthusiastically said what an incredible thing it was and how wonderful he felt because of it, and then asked Ten to open another barrel. Tino recoiled in shock and immediately refused. He was convinced that he had already done everything to convey to them. Wine is only drunk once a week. Then he put on his jacket to go out, and suddenly felt a strange cold, although less than half a month had passed since the beginning of autumn. Gamble and his team stopped near the forest. Fell silent. Suddenly snow appeared ahead, and they could not understand what was happening. They headed to the town closest to the forest, Tartarus, where the snow was falling so heavily that Gamble said, "Those magicians were full of nonsense," and the man feared that Gamble would slaughter them. He reminded the mage and ordered Gamble to throw out of his head the idea of going into the forest, in such weather we will just waste all the magic trying to melt the snow in this blizzard, even with a magic circle. Gamble silenced the reminder, saying, if it were only them, it wouldn't have stopped them. The man noted that the mages were right. They had never seen such heavy snow before. They were lucky they managed to return to Tartarus. The ruler of the city was Marcus, who won the tournament and came there by the king's order. Gamble reassured the guests. He said they would just winter here and restore their strength. They were preparing to drive the slaves and the animals they rode into the warehouse, and Gamble ordered one man to watch that the slaves were fed enough so they wouldn't die. The scene shifts to Tennu. He was cold and admired the snakes when suddenly he saw Karen, engulfed in flames, flying. He froze in shock. Karen came closer and asked if he was cold. He hugged her and asked if he was burning. In response, he heard no. He was surprised. Only a day had passed, and the snow had already piled up. He had never seen anything like this in Japan. Dogs and wolves played in the snow, and Tennu, watching them, noticed how alive they were. Even through the barrier, he felt cold just from looking. They were having so much fun playing in the snow that they eventually joined the races. Ko said that the germs seemed to have already settled in well. Chi agreed and added that it was all thanks to their master. Cool added that indeed the magic of their master really calmed him. Once, during a fierce fight with Churney and Foamy, he would have rushed into battle, but now, strangely, he had no desire to fight them at all. Chase said that all this was due to the power of their master. It is this power that allows him to speak with them, and he is truly grateful to him. And it was then that Tino petted Ko and asked if he liked being petted. Ko thought the feeling was simply wonderful and decided that his winter coat was the best. Chi, on the other hand, did not get as much pleasure from this. When he called Ko wondered if Chi had something to say, so he simply replied, "Speak." Chai approached Tino, who stood puzzled under his watchful gaze. He pretended as if he wanted more animals, and his Tino continued. Chase slowly rested his head on Tino's hand, looking a little sad. Tino wondered, did she also want to be petted? Ko told Chain not to bother the master. Chair replied that he did not mean that at all. Tino glanced at Chi and casually said that he was very cute, and Chi insisted that this was not at all what he wanted to say. Then Ko left, went on patrol, and Chi followed him. Ko told him that even his students could envy the master. Chi was shocked. Although he was almost as strong as Fenrir, the balance of power did not change at all. Atha was not such a fool as to not notice when he was loved. Meanwhile, Choi thought that she would hardly understand how he really felt if he did not say it out loud. But that was exactly what made Ko so attractive. He joked that Chi, when he returned, would groom him. With that, the two set off on the road, and Tennu wished Chi luck. But he could not shake the thought that Chi might end up in the friend zone, especially since they were representatives of different species. At first, the date went quietly and peacefully. But on the very same day, there was also a drinking party. Tenno watched as the wolf sparred with Shuri and wondered if wolves took breaks from hybridization. It was as if these scuffles had already become a habit for them. He shouted so they wouldn't get hurt. At first, he was worried he would drink too much, but eventually decided to relax and enjoy. He bit off a piece of food and noted that he had a lot of courage and a glass of dry wine, which paired perfectly. He noticed that Fluffy and the flying lizard were behaving normally. Even as they sipped wine, he suddenly, to his surprise, saw a snowman who somehow saved Fluffy. It was so cute that he couldn't stop wondering what exactly created it. When he touched it, he thought, could this be marshmallow? He had no idea where it came from or if it was actually one of Fluffy's friends. And so the three of them flew into the sky, leaving the wolves enchanted. Tino's heart swelled from this beautiful sight. As soon as Tino woke up, he wondered, did he have a strange dream? But soon he realized it was not a dream. There really was marshmallow lying before him. Suspecting that it might be one of them, he decided to name it. At first Paul de Fluffy, but in case he didn't like that name, he also added White. No reaction, but he still felt the same. Quietly in his memory, it flashed that last night he seemed to have said something. Then he asked if he liked the name Marshmallows. He jumped into the snow and suddenly noticed an amoeba in the water. Somehow they gave off a completely different feeling, which he attributed to the snow. He wanted. Was there at least some difference in magical power between them? Those who emerged from the water possessed magic similar to Fluffy, all whose powers resembled Fluffy. He was told that it was not just more creatures the cold had given rise to a completely new species. Karen, still sleepy, exclaimed that she couldn't believe she had overslept so much, blaming the overly tasty drink for it. He shouted that it was time to change the plan and set out in search of the dragon that very day. Just at that moment, he noticed a dragon lizard flying in the sky. Ko, looking at Karen, remarked, "So he has finally woken up." Karen froze in amazement. The ice spirits had also returned. Ko explained that this sudden cold snap was probably because the ice dragon had regained its strength. Later, Karen asked if this meant that only 2 dragons remained. Chi thoughtfully asked if all the dragons would gather together. Ko agreed and explained that once this happened, the forest would finally recover. He added that dragons naturally gravitate toward the power of their master, hinting that Karen was good for nothing. Karen shouted for everyone to be quiet, insisting that he was not just searching for dragons, other things were needed to restore the forest. Things on which the very color and existence of the heart of the forest depended. Tenno, looking at them, smiled. They had already befriended each other, and it seemed that now everything would be fine. While he was sleeping, the chief lifted him and carried him away from there, making him believe that he was suddenly being kidnapped, and it was a bit scary. Anna anxiously wondered if Shuri and the others had already woken up from hibernation. He thought he would be an obedient boy. He looked back, wondering if this was Shuri's new nest, and noticed it. They touched that block there. It seemed they wanted several blocks to line up along the wall. He helped them make a path and then noticed that spiders came along with the snow. He decided to teleport the blocks, saying, "It will be faster this way, and because of the heat, it's better to make the storage a freezer, otherwise the snow spiders will melt." He watched as Amoeba and Fluffy played, and thought it would be good to do some repairs in advance, in case the snow melts and the snow creatures need help. He wondered if they were worried about the roots and when spring would finally come. Brinkin threw out the idea to clear that side of the river. When Shuri and the chief started clapping for him, he thought with surprise when they had learned to greet so loudly. Eventually, the 10th season came to an end, and inside the doll, the remnants of snow and wool were carefully brushed away. They managed to successfully hunt prey and return it to their lair. Tenno sincerely thanked them for their efforts and wondered if some of them had hunted recently. The scene shifts to Hammers, where a man approached him and asked if he had heard the rumors. The Hammers, reviewing papers, asked about the nature of these rumors. The man whispered that there was a rumor. Supposedly, if you mistreat slaves, they will be cursed and the forest will turn against them, and that this was an incredibly foolish rumor. He asked Hammers if he thought the same or truly believed that those beasts were capable of such things. Hammers sharply replied, "Would you dare say that in front of the king?" The man froze upon hearing this, and the gamers noted that it was disrespectful. The man quickly explained that he had no such intention at all. The gamers replied that he was just joking, and that he knew how loyal that man was to the king. The man agreed, but asked the gamers not to intimidate him like that he was a lieutenant and deserved his support. Another person nearby remarked that the gamer's comment was inappropriate. As the two walked away, the gamer thought to himself, "That man is loyal to the king, so under no circumstances should he find out." Meanwhile, the slave hinted to the others that edible plants could be found there. Then he showed them an image of the treacherous snake, and warned that it could leap up to 2 body lengths. Their lives depended on whether they remembered this. Tennu was chopping wood into logs, and the gansy were carrying them to build a fence around their garden. Tenno's reminding that this needed to be done soon, and the work was going rapidly. He thought that everyone was burning with impatience. There was almost nothing to do during the long winter. They all immersed themselves in work, and thought that spring had invigorated everyone so much that they had almost nothing left to do. Lately, it seemed that only about half of them went hunting, and so looked normal every time he saw him. Just then, a wolf approached, and Tennu began to pet him. He then saw so and noted that quite some time had passed since he last saw her. He glanced. Her belly was such that he wondered if she was pregnant, but since it was spring, he decided it was natural. That's how it went. He felt that it made him a little lonely, and he almost forgot that he actually had to look for the forest edge. He wondered would they have enough food if so many babies appeared soon. He was a little worried. He checked the food supplies and thought anxiously if that was all they had left. Thanks to the provisions in the pantry, they managed to get through the winter and feed everyone. I think they should consider expanding the field. And then he looked at the faces of the runners shining with admiration. A few days later, he saw offspring of various wolves, squirrels, and even this. He was happy. In those few days, they had several successful births, and the babies seemed incredibly cute to him. But Ko's children looked almost exactly like their parents, and the thought that Ko was now a mother still seemed strange to him. He glanced at Chai and noticed that he had managed to cross the boundaries between races, and he sincerely appreciated it. He went into the forest, smiling, and said what a wonderful forest this is, and that he must do everything in his power for their growing family. The team of farmers spared no effort on the new fields, so he decided to expand the granary. Although he was a little puzzled that almost half of the new fields seemed strange to him. He touched the walls to infuse his magic into them, and then rushed to help the golems. Then while he was resting, another new creature appeared. And it was incredible. Tennu recognized in it a phasmatodia, the largest insect in the world, and this one was undoubtedly about 10 times larger than any he had seen before. At that moment, Karen appeared and happily exclaimed that she had managed to find them. This undoubtedly proved her value to Tennu. Tennu wondered why she seemed so proud about something, and lately he increasingly felt that they were puffing out their chests. She survived and explained that those creatures are tree spirits. Karen agreed and said that the tree spirits have returned, so probably the world tree has also come to life. In 10A, the question flashed, what is happening since everyone seems to be gathering in one place? Just then, a new creature waved its hand for Tennu to follow it outside, and Tennu wondered in surprise why she needed to go there. He approached closer and with a slight tremor in his voice, explained that he came here because he felt some strange magic. And as if the magic itself was calling Tennu, he became curious about what it was. He really felt that mysterious magical power. Everyone headed in that direction, and the mercenary felt the mystery growing. They approached. They stopped in front of a simply gigantic tree, and Tennu was surprised to see it. Shuri exclaimed that he couldn't believe it. For the first time in his life, he sees such a tree. They jointly, without any doubt, asserted that it is the world tree that governs the heart of that forest. Karen said she heard that it is protected by several barriers, and only the chosen can approach. The chief added that he once felt its presence throughout the entire forest. Tennu, looking more closely, said that it seems to be withering. Ko explained that it had protected the forest from human attacks for so long, and now it has almost no strength left. Shuri Grid hoped that their master's magic could restore it. Tennu looked at creatures resembling grasshoppers and wondered if they were somehow waiting for him to do something. He felt magical energy being drawn from him, so he decided to just let it flow further. It was then that the leaves began to break off and fall to the ground. Tennu and the others were under. Surprise, I am surprised and not sure if this was supposed to happen. Another creature looked unwell, and Tennu was confused, not knowing what to do. Ko told Tennu that he needed to come up with a plan, and Karen agreed. Many clues led to the next episode. He fell, and as soon as his foot touched one, it lit up. He was surprised and could not understand what was happening. There was nothing there. But then he noticed a small wooden creature nearby. Tennu stepped back and noticed that the creature was following them. He wondered if it was a tree monster. Everyone around was acting strangely. Karen was worried whether their master's magic was mixing with the tree's magic. Shari quietly said that it was the tree of the world. Then they asked me and Ko if that thing was safe. Ko nodded in agreement, and Tennu yielded, wondering where he had been. He could have left it alone. Making a new clearing would mean disturbing the marshmallow basement room. When they were returning home, all the new creatures seemed happily to rush into Lake Fluffy. As if he liked it, the small tree-like creature stuck its roots into the ground near the lake and quickly grew, surprising Tenno. He said it was incredible and pondered, is this exactly how trees in the world become raw materials? It scared him a little, but now they had a new friend. The scene shifts to Jembel and his team, where they were fiercely fighting monsters and cutting them down. Jembel chopped down a dragon and noted that hunting it was incredibly boring. And he did not expect that half of their subordinates would be enough. He knew that these beasts' only saving trait was their fierce ferocity. They were just setting up a magic circle to break the barrier around the forest perimeter when someone shouted that the barrier had several layers, and they needed to hurry. Gamble announced that the time was near, and very soon they would show those scoundrels in the forest the power of the strongest emperor. Someone wonders how to prepare the Lord of the Forest when he shows his face. Another replies that he is a beast, so they need to cook several dishes from him and present them to the king. Gamble thinks that now the truth about his flaw will be fearless and completely unlike other orders. They were knights of the king, but all cowards. For some, the forest feels different, but that should not be a problem. He wonders what scared the knights of the Fourth Order so much and whether they were knights at all. He would have beaten them if he had not been stopped, and one man begged him not to go, saying "Sock bot," and it reminded him of what he was like. They told him that the mages were surprised why their forces were so strangely composed. Gamel says that these incompetent ones should at least think about it a little. All attacks struck that ancient magic stone in the castle. Even when it broke the king's sword, it clearly drew power from the stones, but the attacks from the forest were themselves directed at the stones, they just had to stop using them, since there were plenty of other offensive spells in reserve. He failed to bring any high-ranking mage, and the day could bring sacrifices that would add to their strength. And then he asked everyone to just listen. They were going to break the barrier around the forest with those two magical circles, and then set it on fire with a torch, so that everything they saw would burn nicely. Everyone agreed to do this. Gamble said that there were barriers in the forest that did not let the monster out, and they needed to be burned from the outside, acting with words. Someone asked him to leave some for them as well, and Gamble appreciated their enthusiasm, saying not to worry, they would still have many chances to prove themselves. He noticed that another jerk had come and finally learned from his mistake. Now all the slaves were below 5, and that useless one who was not taught to fight would simply die. If something went wrong and they escaped, they would become prey in the forest. He looked at the cage and thought that it seemed the drugs had started to work. Even if they were trash, serving the king was a true privilege. The scene jumped to Tenno. He was watching as the Kidwolves misbehaved, playing with magic. Tenement noticed that they were growing so rapidly. Although they were only a week old, they were already playing dangerously. He was sure as long as their mother watched over them, everything would be fine. Usually he has so much free time and wonders if more amoebas have appeared in the field. Every day he makes his rounds, checking on his comrades to find out how they are doing. He was clearly not just having fun, he was dozing. Those new creatures led him to the tree, and he whispered that it was, as always, magnificent. He still did not understand what those stick insects were trying to tell him, but if he did not visit them even for a day, they came for him with sad eyes. He said he saw the tree growing right before his eyes, and that everything in the world grows up so quickly. For him, it was another quiet day, and probably he should go look for leaves to brew some tea. The scene shifted to the magic circle created by Gamble's team, where the mages were casting spells and the slaves sat in their places. The man whispered to Gamma that it was almost time and wondered if they would resist at all. Gamma coldly replied that he would cut down anyone who dared to challenge the king. And now let's see what was supposed to happen. On the other hand, Ten films something strange is happening, and he says he feels a bad premonition. At that moment, those stick insects rush towards him on 6 legs, and it surprises him. He wonders if it is too early for this and if something happened to the tree. He wondered if magic was hiding in the chaos and if healing would work. He thought it would help a little, but in the end it turned out to be only temporary relief. Cocaine asking if it was some kind of attack on them. Tenon understood that even Cole was worried, but he saw it for the first time, so he did not know what it was. Died again, and this could be the end of the forest. He was worried whether it would take root in a bad place, but it chose its place by itself. Tenno heard that fungus in unsuitable soil could damage a tree, but he was not an expert. He just manages everything. If considered as an external attack, he would simply strengthen the tree's immunity with magic to the maximum. Perhaps pests had already settled in the roots, so he would also strengthen its defense. As soon as he activated his power, his comrades froze in shock, and Ko said that the world tree was enveloped by the magic of their master. Now Tenno had to find the source of the problems and prevent them. Pests and fungi spread through the soil, so he would have to comb through a large area to trace their origin and apply a filter to check a wide zone. Then looking at the leaves, it seemed that everything was working and the tree's power finally stabilized. Perhaps other trees were also affected, they needed treatment, but he rejected this idea. Better to root out the very cause, he would separate everything that the tree creatures would consider enemies. The scene shifted to the castle, where Hammer sat over papers and thought about the fact that he had already been waiting for new investigation requests from the surrounding villages for several days in a row. A mysterious light flying across the sky could clearly scare anyone. Although he did not have solid evidence linking those incidents, he was sure that phenomenon affects magical stones. Just at that moment, a man with a thirsty, greedy look entered the room. He addressed gamers and asked if he had heard the news. The gamers replied that if he was talking about the fifth one who reached the forest, yes, they had heard. Mislo said, "News spreads fast, doesn't it? The man had that, the forest is now finished." But gamers were clearly not thrilled. "That's the problem," he said. "Even the fourth managed to get that far when they invaded the forest." Mislo's pointed and they were immediately attacked. The gamers reacted, although the light struck them were they wounded or dead. Only Slate managed to escape right. Miss Loss was about to say something, but the gamers did not stop. Probably it was a warning, and only truly strong ones can afford such luxury. "So what do you think what will happen after the warning?" The guest boy and the attack. The gamers nodded. They need to watch the time closely. The fifth invasion might give the forest a reason to strike back at that country, and the man clenched his fists and said coldly, "Then I will burn it all down." The scene shifts to Tennu. He thought the forest, hiding, destroys everyone who gets too close. He was determining the side effects of the target to understand what was wrong. He turned any insect or mushroom to ash and burned them all. Gamble said that the attack was approaching and the devils had gained the upper hand. It was time to show them what awaited. The man said he would kill them all. When they arrived, they wondered, where were the slaves? Suddenly a dazzling light appeared and they saw nothing more. And they could see again and immediately saw that the mages were burning. And then Gamble summoned water to stop it. But when that didn't work, Gamble asked the one who knew magic to simply extinguish the fire. No matter how hard they tried, nothing worked. On the contrary, the flames only raged more. So Haim asked the others to step back and suddenly, the entire magic circle caught fire. The slaves were still in the prisoner wagon near the fire. He moved to Tennu and saw that the tree looked happier. He wondered what else could be done and whether the injection had already entered his system. Perhaps what remained could be used as fertilizer. He checked himself from the inside, ground the target into porridge and swallowed it. The scene shifts to Gamma. He heard something and wondered what it was. The man said it was a magic circle for removing barriers. Gamble ordered them to sneak carefully, and when they moved forward, the ground beneath their feet suddenly began to blacken. Gamma could not believe it. Were they joking with him? Seeing all this, he was completely shocked. The scene shifts to Tennu. He watched as the tree grew bigger and completely relaxed, leaned back. He said that her magical power had calmed down, so he thought everything was fine now, although his heart was still pounding. It was the first time he was so scared, so that no one dared to touch his friends. On the other hand, Gamble's team fell there and everyone felt completely different. Gamma looked around, not understanding what was happening. It was simply unthinkable. Slaves also moved from that place. The scene shifted to the mage, who was flipping through papers and reports and learned that the fifth squad had indeed broken into the forest. Many mages were going with them now, so they hoped to return alive and unharmed. Flipping through all the records, the sorcerer thought he found nothing written about how to strengthen the magic stone other than through sacrifices, and it was primarily about magic created by blood. He read that to connect the magic stone, 700 lives were needed, about 100 more for the effect of visible magic, and about 7,000 lives over 100 years. It seemed to him that the more he read about it, the more futile it became. The players in the room with Mislost and another man said they were shown. The forest would definitely recognize them as enemies, which meant an invasion. But he felt it was already too late. And the man was about to say something when suddenly they all were overwhelmed by pressure and fell to the ground. And even everyone else in the castle felt the same. Hammer admitted that it seemed like someone was pressing him and, at this rate, he could die, but dying was something he could not afford yet. The one who read the records felt the same. He also did not want to die. He believed that 200 slaves were not enough to strengthen the magic stone, so they would have to increase the pace to compensate. Reviewing the documents he submitted, he could not understand why they did not use beastmates to do more. He also heard that there were sleepers who cried even after their emotions were dulled, and this interested him and made him think about forgiveness. Ganners tried to get up and could not get rid of the thought about the other two. He saw with relief that Miss Lost was okay, and the other man was wounded but still breathing. The wrath of the king of the world broke out beyond the forest. The sage coughed, thought it had already stopped, and then pondered about the others. The Didarsis were alive, and the one who read the report reflected on that pure rage. They were tormented by the thought, had they brought upon themselves someone's wrath. He thought the world would not forgive them. The sage hurried to inform the others that something had happened to the king and earnestly asked them to help. And then he asked to execute those who had broken in. Another sage thought that, apart from the loyal daughter and granddaughter of the king, anyone who entered his bedroom looked strange. Not that the king trusted them. They entered and the sage announced that he had brought that person. The king screamed in pain, said he heard, and begged them to hurry and heal him. His hand was cut off, and crying he spoke about his former body, not understanding how it could have happened. The mages fervently asked that person to heal their king. That person agreed and began to heal the king's hand. They thought it was not theirs, and it was like drawing water with a sieve, almost no progress. The king's body was supposed to be the strongest, but something changed, and all they could do was somehow cover the wound. After that, the healer left, throwing to the one who closed the door. If only the magic stone were in perfect condition, this would not have happened at all. The second person wondered why it was impossible to find a way to repair the same magic stone. The scene shifts to the forest, where everything is completely fine. While the puppies were playing, Tennu noticed with surprise that they had grown to the size of ordinary dogs in a moment. Then he shifted his gaze to the tree spirits, to the stick insects, and to Echo the tree. He believed he had given the tree the name Echo because it somehow felt completely different from the others. 1.5 months had passed since then, and the dream now looked much healthier. He could not comprehend what caused such a huge leap in growth. Looking at the forest, he noticed that everything had clearly changed. He had done it. He did not quite know if they would call it mana, but he felt every single source of mana and the forest itself much more clearly than before. Since Ecos had recovered, it seemed that something was slowly changing. And since everyone was quite satisfied with it, he assumed that it was good that the forest had become different.